So great to see so many friendly and familiar faces at 9:15 in the morning. My name is Douglas Namle. I'm Director of Policy and Leadership Development here at AAFE, and I'm very honored to kick off our 6th annual Asian American Community Development Conference. So this year's theme is building our communities with resiliency and strength. We as an organization really came up with this theme, not only reflecting on the very intense and boundary pushing year that New York City has faced and our communities have faced, but also reflecting back on the past 40 years of AAFE's work. So we have a full day scheduled with plenary speakers and workshop panelists, talking about a variety of issues, everything from civic participation to urban revitalization, and of course, a really driving theme of all the work that we do, how much our communities as Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are growing and diversifying across New York City and New York State. So let's get us started. To start us off, I'd like to welcome AAFE's board chair, Wendy Takahisa. Let's give her a round of applause.
Thanks, Douglas. Good morning. On behalf of the board, good morning. Good morning. On behalf of the board and the staff of Asian Americans for Equality, I want to welcome you all to the 6th annual Asian American Community Development Conference. Yay, now you can applaud. This year's theme, as Douglas mentioned, is building our communities with resiliency and strength. And frankly, it's what we here at AAFE have been doing, not just in the past year, but really for the last 4 decades. It's really been what's guided us, and I really want to thank Chris and the staff for all of the work that they've done for pulling together another great conference. I think the theme is both very timely and very timeless, which is a great thing to have in a conference theme. And I hope you're all going to stay for the whole day, because we're really going to spend all day thinking about the significant growth and development of the Asian American community in New York City. We'll think a little bit about the dialogue, about what it means for our upcoming elections. We've got mayor's election coming up. We've got other citywide offices coming up and a new city council coming up soon. We'll think about our roles and responsibilities, and I really ask us all to reflect personally on what it means to be committed to this community, what our civic engagement ought to be. I think that's something that's going to run through all of the plenary sessions today and all of the workshop conferences. We'll hear from our leaders, particularly those people who worked in recovery efforts against Superstorm Sandy and what's happening in the rebuilding process. And really, I think there's no better theme for resiliency and strength than what this community and what AAFE in particular has done to rebuild from Superstorm Sandy. We'll talk about innovative work that's addressing poverty, developing new entrepreneurs, and building civic participation in our immigrant communities. And we will spend some time talking a little bit about the opportunity, maybe unprecedented, that we have now to actually explore the issues of immigration reform. It seems like every year we come up and think that the time is right this year, but maybe this year the time really is ripe for that. But my favorite part of this day, and this is our 6th year, is frankly what happens in between. So go to all the workshops. Please go on time, because we do try to run the conference on time. But we hope we've scheduled enough time for you to talk in the breaks, to reacquaint yourself with old friends, to meet new people, and to begin to really brainstorm and develop some offline ideas about what we can all do. As I said, it's our 6th year. Every year I come away more energized from this conference, ready to go out and make a difference. So we hope you stay all day, as well as for the reception tonight, because that's always lots of fun, lots of drinks, and we will be honoring some of our pioneers who have really made a difference in this community. So I'd like to thank you all for coming, and without anything else, bring up Chris Coy, our Executive Director, without whom none of this would be possible.
Yeah, thank you. Our president, Wendy, and then I just really want to recognize also like Doug, who's been really, and then his team really been able to pull this event together single-handedly with his team, and then also I know Peter G and his team also been collaborating with with Doug's department. So again, thank you very, very much, and my duty is really just to introduce Lynn Brown, who's the Senior Vice President of NYU Relations and Public Affairs, and then I mean, I know all of you love this room. I love it, because I know in the past we've been having this conference upstairs, and we thought that, my God, we're changing the room, and then what would it look like? And this is actually beautiful, and then with your support and your again, generosity for making this happen. So again, let me introduce Lynn.
Thank you all, and welcome to NYU, and I'm glad you like the room. We are delighted to host you here today for this important conference, and shout out to Chris Coy, his whole team, and AAFE for the great work you do. You know, supporting and strengthening local communities and finding ways to connect them to the resources and expertise they need is a valuable job, and it's not for people who want easy victories and one-shots. It's day in, day out, building the capacity, and as I say, we at the university are delighted to help in whatever small ways we can to contribute to that larger effort. I do think it's appropriate for NYU to host you, not only because we have bricks and mortar, but we actually have people on campus that align a lot with what your goals are as well. And I just want to mention three. In the health arena, NYU hosts what's called the NYU Center for the Study of Asian American Health. This is a group of researchers and medical providers who are working to reduce the health disparities in the Asian American community through research and clinical outreach. We have an Asian Pacific American Institute on campus that tries to work to dispel some of the, we were talking about this at the table, some of the sociocultural and political misconceptions that surround the Asian Pacific American community. And our own students are very active in this space. We have an Asian Pacific American Leadership Summit held and led by our own student groups. I also want to welcome here to NYU today Councilman Drum, whose work in both his community and throughout the Asian American community is apparently, and I'm told by all the folks who know, second to none. So congratulations and welcome as well. And I'll just end by saying you've got a full day, so I will get out of the way to let you get on to it. You meet today, though, obviously against the backdrop of Hurricane Sandy and the devastating blow that dealt to many communities. And as your conference today looks to continue to restore your neighborhoods and delve into lessons learned from that, I think resilience is the right word. That marks us as a city. I'd like to think it marked us as a university going through it, and I know it marks you as communities. We're pleased to work with you as you go forward to build ever stronger and more resilient communities. So thank you, congratulations, and have a great day.
So before we kick off into our plenary panel, I just want to take a minute to walk folks through the day today. We're very excited because we have a really broad array of perspectives being touched upon throughout the conference. Our breakfast this morning, the morning plenary, and also our afternoon luncheon will be held in this room. The workshops will be happening across the hallway in room 406, and also 2 more workshops upstairs on the 9th floor. We have some very lovely ushers throughout this space to help you get to your right room. But just want to throw it out there that we will have our event in 2 different spaces today. But please check out all the workshops. There's over 40 panelists who are coming to speak today who work all across the city and even out of the state. And before we transition into our plenary session, I did want to take some time to acknowledge all of our supporters today. Of course, the whole team here at New York University, Lynn, Arlene, Sire, Marie, Patricia, and Myung, and their staff. Also, New York Community Bank Corps, BNY Mellon, HSBC Bank, Edison Properties. Because really without their support, we wouldn't be able to make this conference as accessible and as full of a day for all of you all as our partners and friends. So let's give all of our sponsors a round of applause. Wonderful. So now I'd like to ask the morning plenary to come up and take their seats. Yeah. So we have a really expert panel here who are really going to touch upon what's happening across New York City, but also New York State. Howard will kick off with a presentation of very relevant and timely data on how our communities across the state are growing and changing. But I'm especially honored today to welcome a longtime friend to AAFE, Lisa Hasegawa, who is the Executive Director of the National Coalition for Asian Pacific American Community Development, also known as National Capacity. And she represents folks like AAFE, I think over 100? Over 100 organizations like AAFE, Asian-led, Asian-serving community development groups all over the country. So let's give Lisa and the panel a round of applause. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here. I think I've been to most of these conferences, and it's a great way for me to reconnect with what's going on the ground. So I'm very pleased to be here. And I hail from California, and I'm here from Washington, D.C. So it's great to come to New York. We do have an awesome panel, as Doug said. And just to get it kicked off, we'll have Howard, and then I'll go ahead and introduce the rest of the panelists after Howard's presentation. So, Howard. We're not wasting any time.
Thank you, Lisa. All right, the glasses? Glasses. Is yours? Oh, okay. All right, good morning, everybody. Can you all hear me all right? Yeah. Okay, go grab a cup of coffee because, first thing in the morning, I'm going to throw all this data at you guys, and I'm going to see, hopefully I won't see any nodding heads. But I think as a way of introduction, the Asian American Federation, as part of our mission to advance the civic voice and the well-being of Asian Americans in the New York City metro area, one of the things that we do is a series of reports and briefs on the Asian American community. And last year we did one on New York City. This year, recently, we released one on New York State, and we have various ethnic profiles that are continuously being updated as census data comes out and American Community Survey data comes out. For the future, we have a series of other reports that are going to roll out over the next year or two. And I hope you check out our website to keep up with the data output. So today's presentation, I'm going to generally cover 5 areas. For demographic change across the last decade, a lot of this information is based on the 2 reports that you see up there. We'll also take a look at immigration. We'll look at economic contributions, housing, and civic participation. Actually, I did that all out of order, but to keep you on your toes. So demographic change. If you look at the overall population in New York State, Asian Americans are Asian New Yorkers are the fastest growing ethnic group among the major groups. In fact, without Asian or Hispanic population growth, the total population in New York State would have shrank over the last decade. If we take a look more closely at how this growth changed regionally, if you define upstate as being beyond the metro area and then a region of the suburban counties around New York City and then New York City as a core, the Asian population is growing faster outside of New York City. As a consequence, the regional distribution of Asians across the state has seen a shrinkage in the population that's in New York City. It used to be 75%, now it's 72%. So how are the ethnicities changing within our state? Well, if you look at the fastest growing populations, you'll see that South Asian groups are among the fastest growing groups. Bangladeshi, Sri Lankan, and Pakistani are among the top 4 in the percent growth in those populations. And then there's some emerging, in the lower right-hand corner, there's some groups that weren't broken out separately in Census 2000, the Bhutanese, Burmese, and Nepalese. If you reconstitute that group from 2000 and compared it with the 2010 totals, you'll see that group grew by 524%. So you're seeing a real shift in the population within the state in terms of more growth among South Asians. Not to say that the other growth in the other groups are not significant as well. There's still continuous growth in all of the major Asian groups. So combining the regional look and the ethnic group look, you'll see that while Asians overall are mainly concentrated in New York City, you got to really look at the ethnic breakdowns to really understand what's happening in the community. So you see this core group like Bangladeshis and Chinese are following the historic pattern of immigrating to the ethnic enclaves of New York City and then gradually dispersing out as the decades go on. But there's also a significant group at the bottom where you have the Laotians, the Bhutanese, Hmong, Burmese, Vietnamese, and Cambodian groups. Those are all groups that have substantial portions of their immigrant population coming from refugee status. And so they've been resettled in upstate areas that have been seeing heavy population declines in order to bolster the populations upstate. So you end up with sort of different statewide policies have to take into account this shift in division of the mix of the Asian ethnicities. So how does immigration play out looking at the past decade? Well, you see, immigration still accounts for a large portion of our growth, but it's not the second generation, the growth in the second generation population is almost as significant. It's faster percentage-wise, and in terms of numbers, it's very close. They're very close to the number of immigrants that are coming to our state. So as a consequence, the number of the percent of foreign-born in New York State has gone from 74% to 69%. And then if we look at the percent within the different ethnic groups, you'll see that some of the groups, Southeast Asians in particular, have a smaller percentage who are foreign-born, and then you have the newer groups, the Nepalese and Burmese, who have been arriving in more recently. And so if you look at that you combine that with the decade that people arrived in, you see while most Asian groups the majority of immigrants arrived in 1990 or later, the Cambodians, Laotians, more than about 70% or more of those populations arrived before 1990. So as a consequence, their foreign-born populations are lower, but you still have the children who have, the children of those immigrants who still have those, the issues related to immigration. And then you see the newer groups, the Burmese and Nepalese, the vast majority of them arrived in the last decade, after 2000. And then two groups in particular have some unique distributions in terms of when they arrived compared to the other groups. 85% of Bangladeshis arrived in 1990 or later, and for most Asian groups it was more typically 60 to 70%. So the Bangladeshis also have some of that more recent immigrant characteristics. And then also interesting, while Japanese were only 62% were foreign-born, almost half of those foreign-born arrived in the last decade. So you're seeing the Japanese immigration have more of an expat flavor than the other groups. So as immigrants come to our country, well, one of the things that we hope that they do is that become citizens. And so when you look at the naturalization rate among Asians, it's fairly encouraging. About 54% of immigrants are naturalized citizens. And especially considering that a lot of Asians are more recent arrivals, it's a good sign. What's more troubling is there's a gap between citizenship and voting. This is from our New York City report. I've not yet run the numbers for New York State, but I imagine it's fairly similar. You see that only 42% said that they registered to vote, and 29% didn't even reply to this particular question. And this is from the current population survey. So there's based on these figures, there's potentially more than 300,000 people who are eligible to vote in the Asian community who are not registered. And then they also asked for reasons why they did not register, and a lot of it seems to be a lack of understanding about the whole process. They didn't know they were eligible to vote, they didn't know how to register, and then language capacity is also a big issue. And then they also asked about why people did not vote if they were registered, and we found that Asians were more than twice as likely to say they're too busy as a reason to vote. So you have the combination of not understanding the process and also a bit of a more focus on the economic part of being an immigrant rather than the participation civically. And then we look at the language needs of Asian voters. Chinese and Korean assistance is available. I think South Asian, there's still some issues in terms of they've decided some languages to support for South Asians. Bengali is a key one that they've decided to support. But there have been some issues in the previous election about implementing that. And I think perhaps one of our panelists will discuss that issue. But certainly, we need to take a look at, as the South Asian community is growing, how are we going to support their efforts to participate in the process? Okay, all right. So the next topic is economic contributions. A lot of Asian immigrants are economic immigrants. And so one of the things that we wanted to look at is to see how Asians are participating in the economy. One of the things to look at is entrepreneurship. If we look at Asians overall, we have similar self-employment rates as non-Hispanic whites, around 11%, 12%. So you say, okay, so Asians are not more likely to be entrepreneurs than other groups. But again, here's where we have to look at the ethnic data. We have to disaggregate the data to see what's happening in our communities. So if you look at Koreans, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Nepalese, Vietnamese, and Japanese, they all have much higher rates of self-employment than other groups. And so, we can argue about the different cultural or economic reasons why this is so, but there certainly needs to be attention paid to these particular groups in terms of how we support them through SBA and other programs that are available. Another way we can look at how people can participate economically is to look at their educational levels. If you look at Asians, you have the model minority cliche, 46% have a bachelor's degree or higher, but you have to look at the other numbers. If you look at 21% never finished high school, 13% never even attended high school. So those are some pretty stunning rates for the Asian community, and this is statewide numbers. And then how do Asians directly participate in the economy? You find Asians all over in all sorts of industries, but there are particular ones where Asians are overrepresented, meaning the percent of Asian workers is much higher than the percent of total workers in that particular industry. So you see wholesale trade, transportation, which is basically your taxi and livery services, finance and insurance, professional, technical, and scientific services, food services, and then finally a catch-all service category that includes personal care, laundry services, and a variety of other services to the community. And then if you look at occupations, you see for Asians overall, you got this, the model minority cliche showing up again, where you got computers, life science, scientists and doctors and nurses, and then you have food prep workers, the food service industry dominating, showing that Asian workers are more likely to be in those lines of work. But again, we have to break things down by ethnicity to take a look at how particular communities are dependent on particular occupations. So if you look at Bangladeshis and Pakistanis, they were 4 times more likely to work in transportation occupations than all workers in across New York City. Skipping some other ones, you got Laotians working in manufacturing. You got Nepalese working in buildings, grounds, and cleaning and maintenance, and Vietnamese working in personal care service occupations. And then finally, I'll close on housing issues. I think this is something that's particularly close to AAFE's heart. If you look at home ownership, Asian households were less likely to own their homes compared to non-Hispanic white households. In particular, in upstate counties, home ownership rate was only 46% compared to 73% for non-Hispanic white households. There's less of a gap in the suburban New York City areas. And then Asian homeowners were also more likely to carry a mortgage than non-Hispanic white households. It was 66 to 57% difference, and the pattern generally holds statewide. So if you look at home ownership, the cost, the burden of home ownership among Asian workers, you got on the left-hand side households that have a mortgage, and then on the right-hand side, households without the mortgage. And then the top line in each category is the Asian numbers. You see that Asians in general, when they hold a mortgage, they, for New York City, over half of those groups have to devote 35% or more of their household income to the ownership costs. So that includes mortgage, taxes, utilities, and whatnot. So when you compare that So the difference between the two, you're seeing Asians they have similar burdens when you look at it without a mortgage. And then so you can interpret that as saying that Asians have taken on a lot more mortgage burden than certainly non-Hispanic whites and comparable to the other groups. So that's especially with the financial crisis a few years ago, that's certainly something that we need to be concerned about in our community. If you look at renters, 46% of Asian households face high housing costs relative to income compared to only 38%, and this is within New York City. So outside of New York City, Asian households who rented were less likely to face high housing costs relative to income. And so, so you have, within the city, certainly affordable housing is an issue within the Asian community, and that's also reflected in the overcrowding numbers, particularly in New York City. These are defined as the number of households with more than one occupant per room, which is sort of the standard definition for overcrowded housing in the literature. And so, you have, it's less of an issue upstate, but within the city, you have this big overcrowding issue within the Asian community. And so just to summarize, sort of the key points I wanted to share with you today was basically, we have the fastest growing community in New York City and New York State. And the growth is becoming increasingly balanced between immigration and second generation, folks that are moving in from other places in the country to New York City for the economic opportunities that are here. Immigrants are also spreading upstate. We need to certainly address those issues at the state level in terms of who's moving upstate and what kind of supports and services do those people need to help them fully integrate into the economies up there. And the final thing I want to leave you with is the importance of looking at disaggregated data. We really need to have better data on our communities. The American Community Survey is great, but it only covers, despite being a large survey, it only covers just touches on the issues that are in our community. And I hope you would support Daniel Drum's initiatives and certainly the statewide initiatives to push for disaggregated data. All right, thanks.
I feel like I've just got a PhD. Thank you, Howard. Howard has been a longtime leader in the nationally, actually, in terms of the Asian American researchers who've really been providing critical data about what's going on in our communities to really help advocates and community-based organizations make the case for the need and the fact that we are not the model minority. And I was fascinated by the more local analysis of the data. National capacity, we have our convention. I'll just do a 2-second plug. Our convention's coming up in Washington, D.C. The first week of June 2nd through 5th, and we're going to be releasing our national Asian American and Pacific Islander poverty report. And so just a reflection, poverty in the API community nationally has increased by 50% in the past decade, and we've lost about half our wealth in the community as a result of mostly because of the foreclosure crisis. And a large percentage of the growth of the poverty population has really become, is really because of the economic crisis, and also it's more native-born than immigrant. And so as we're thinking about immigration reform, this point system, this merit-based system, I think that we're going to be seeing an increase in sort of the economic divide with selective migration coming from those who are well-educated and who have resources to come here. So just a few reflections. AAFE has, been a leader in a lot of these issues facing low-income Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders and API communities broadly in the housing community economic development field, and I think that a lot of what is going on here in New York is a reflection of what really needs to happen on the national level. So I'm really excited to turn to this morning's panel to really get a New York perspective on what is going on here and this intersection between the civic engagement, the growing political power of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. I had a meeting with the president last week, and the first things out of his mouth is, I know that 73% of the Asian American and Pacific Islander community voted for me, and I think that they should have, and he was going on and on. But I think it's no coincidence that some of the results of the election really sort of made the case for why the President of the United States needed to meet with Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. So I stand on the shoulders of AAFE. I was really happy to have been representing all of our community-based organizations at that meeting. So we have our panel here today. We've got Daniel Drum, who Howard mentioned, and I was just teasing him that I get his emails all the time, and maybe because I came to an AAFE conference and got on his mailing list a few years ago. He's a city council member in District 25. We have Allison Sesso with the Human Services Council. Really excited to hear from her. Seema Agnani, she is also my boss. She is the board chair of National Capacity and also the executive director of Chaya CDC in Queens. And we also have Isabel Layton with Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in Philanthropy. So we didn't discuss order here, so I think I'm just going to start with, go here according to the agenda and start with Daniel. Is that okay? Are you surprised? Sorry. Okay, we'll turn it to Daniel.
Okay, a little bit surprised, but happy to go first because I think the other panelists are much more expert in this area than I am, and I won't look quite as foolish when I'm done. But anyway, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here, and I thank Chris and Douglas for inviting me. I represent a district in Jackson Heights and Elmhurst in Queens that is constantly changing. And according to the last census numbers, 39-point-something% of my district was Asian, primarily in the Elmhurst area, but also more and more we see a growth in the Jackson Heights areas, particularly in home ownership on the northern side of Northern Boulevard and 69th Street in Jackson Heights, if you know where that is. And 43% Latino, which is decreasing as the Asian population grows, and about 12% white, and only, according to the new district lines anyway, 1.5% African American. So, it's a difficult but wonderful job to have to try to represent a community as diverse as Jackson Heights and Elmhurst are. But I'm constantly presented with challenges in terms of how I go about that. The community in Elmhurst, the Asian community in Elmhurst, and I say Asian overall, and I'll talk a little bit about some demographic stuff in a minute, is one that really, there are very few services in Elmhurst itself. Most of the Asian community there has to access services either in Flushing or in Chinatown in Manhattan. And one of my goals and objectives has been to try to increase the number of Asian-led organizations in the Elmhurst area with a visible presence right there in the neighborhood. There are some Asian American Women's Center is there, but of course that has to be kept a little bit private because they deal with a lot of domestic violence issues. And in Jackson Heights we have organizations like Chaya and Saya, but primarily they're mostly in the Jackson Heights area. So one of the things that I did as a council member, I come out of the lesbian gay movement, and one of the things that we lacked was visibility. And although everybody sees Asian people, living there, there was no visible demonstration of any pride or commitment, to the community itself. So we thought that one of the things that we should do is to just organize around Lunar New Year, which is kind of simple but kind of easy to do also. And so for the first 3 years that I've been in office, every year we've had a Lunar New Year celebration, which every year has grown from just being a lion dancer and Korean drums, marching around the neighborhood, to actually having a program in one of the local churches and also offering groups tables to distribute literature and to organize. And I think we had about 150 people this year that came, and it was good because it happened right there in the neighborhood. And I think the people who saw us visibly outside with the drums, the line dances, etc., and a little bit of a parade this year as well, can begin to get a feeling of some civic pride in the neighborhood. And I think that's vitally important also. One of the things that I have found is that we do have a large number of Asian identified groups. You have the Sindhu Society, you have Adhikar, you have Chaya. You have groups that are particular to each individual nationality. But where groups have not, where it has not changed is actually moving beyond those types of groups and into groups that are actually civically engaged, where we see people coming out of groups and moving into the community boards, which has also been something that I've been conscious of and try to promote. I put 4 people on Community Board 4 Asians on Community Board 4, where there were very few Asians before, and actually even very few African Americans on that community board. And I feel that that's vitally important as well in terms of the visibility of the community, but also in terms of civic engagement within the community. And then also to work with organizations that do things in the neighborhood like cleanups, and there's one group that it's the New Life Community Empowerment, which is on Queens Boulevard, the old Elks Club, if you're familiar with that area of Queens, that's been doing a good job of working with primarily Asian youth. There are some organizations in some senior centers in the area that don't accurately reflect the Asian community. I mean, they are there, but it's called the Italian Americans Senior Center, and if you go there, it's 99% Asian. You know, that's how much the community has changed. But those are just issues that I try to promote on a very local level. I also, in my own newsletter, always try to promote a lot of Asian visibility and make sure that pictures reflect that so that we can begin to really get things going in Elmhurst. One of the things that I'm most proudest of is that my own Democratic club, we changed the constitution of my club to make it more welcoming to immigrants in general, but specifically to the South Asian community. There was a young man that I met named Munzer Chowdhury when I was campaigning for district leader in 2002. And he wanted to get involved in my campaign, and we said, great. And he came out, he handed out flyers with us, joined us in all of the campaign activities that we were involved in. And when it was over and I won, I had the privilege of starting a club. You know, the clubs are affiliated within the assembly districts in all the neighborhoods. And one of the members of my club, when I wanted to nominate Munzer and put him on the board of the club, objected because he was not yet a citizen and therefore was not a registered Democrat. And the Constitution of the Democratic Club said that you had to be a registered Democrat. And so I'm very proud that my club took away that prerequisite and changed it only to read that those who subscribe to the principles of the Democratic Party were eligible for club membership, including board membership. And because of that, thank you, we have seen a huge growth in the number of Asians that have come into my Democratic club, and I think that also lends itself to much more civic engagement in the community. I'm also the sponsor of the Asian Demographics Bill in the City Council, and it's one of my top 3 priorities. And we introduced it, I think, about a year or so ago. I think we had, when we introduced it, maybe 12 sponsors, and I'm proud today to tell you that we have 26, so we have a majority of the City Council members who now support this legislation. It was hard for me to believe that some agencies in New York City don't even collect just the general Asian demographic, never mind the subgroups as well. And all of city services, particularly under this mayor, are connected to that data. And so, in the fight for funding for Asian-led organizations for services to the Asian communities, that's not showing up in the data. And so this legislation would break it down to the 19 groups that we've agreed upon. And I'm really trying to push this and promote this, and would ask all of you who are advocates out there to make sure that your city council members are signed on to this legislation as well. And I say I have 1 minute. So, but obviously, as you know, I don't have I'm talking to the preaching to the converted here. That's a very important piece of legislation. And finally, let me just mention something that I had a hearing on last week, which is voting rights for immigrants and for non-citizen immigrants, which I think would just change the whole dynamics of politics in New York City. We would never again be able to say that immigrants were not included. This would allow, my legislation would allow anyone lawfully present, I only dealt with those who were documented, in New York City for 6 months or more to vote in municipal elections for mayor, for public advocate, for controller, and for city council. And I believe in democracy with a small d, and I feel that anybody who lives in a community should have the right to participate in that community, in the elections, as they move forward. But just imagine the impact that that would have on communities like mine. By the way, Jackson Heights, Elmhurst, 68% immigrant community. If in fact we were to empower people with the vote, never again would a candidate for citywide office be able to ignore my community. And that's the objective of this legislation. So I'd ask you to also go out and speak to your council members if they haven't already signed on. I have a veto-proof majority on that. I have 34 council members, so this is not fantasy. This can happen. Thank you.
That was awesome. I will go and tell everybody in DC that they should do the same. No, I really appreciate all that you're doing here in New York, where the rubber hits the road, and I think that the nation is watching, and advocates around the country are watching. So much appreciated. Okay, we're going to be turning to Allison Sesso from the Human Services Council. National capacity, we've got probably about 3/4 of our organization are human services organizations, but I think that they have a really important stake in community development issues, in what's going on in neighborhoods, and oftentimes are not seen as critical partners in some of the planning efforts and in housing community development issues because they're not CDCs. So I'm really interested in hearing your remarks, and I'll turn it over to Allison.
Great, thank you. And thank you for inviting me here today. So my organization is essentially an advocate on behalf of social service providers in New York City. And so we watch government, what they do in terms of actions that impact their ability to serve clients, and also watch the government dollars that are flowing in or out of nonprofits. And it's interesting, I appreciate the struggles that you talk about in terms of the number of dollars going into Asian-led organizations, because it is a struggle. And I think it's a timing thing. I mean, I think it does take a long time for government to move and to recognize the new needs. I mean, government does not move quickly, as you know. It takes time. So if you look at historically where the communities that have our social programs have sort of focused on and what their needs have been, they have not been the Asian communities, because as Howard's presentation showed, that community is really growing more and more now. And so it will take time for government to catch up. And I think that the data is absolutely critical, but to get the public policy to move, the most important thing to happen behind that is to matter. So you have to get politically active, and I know that this community is really doing a great job of organizing and moving that, but it does take time, and so you have to be absolutely resilient, and you have to just pound the pavement and be relentless. I mean, I think that's the thing that people expect miracles to happen overnight. Government takes time, and you have to be relentless, and you have to keep pushing the ball. And then once you do, things start changing and things start moving. And if you look at right now, just for example, the Hispanic population, in terms of government and the different parties courting their attention, I mean, that will eventually happen for this community as well. It's just going to take a little bit of time, and they have to recognize the political power of these groups. And I thought it was interesting what Howard was talking about, the voting differences. I mean, voting really does make a difference, and politicians do pay attention to, where people are voting. And I think the way to get people in this community to vote, or in any community to vote, and to make it a priority, it was interesting, you talked about that they didn't have time or they didn't understand. Well, if they can understand how their vote is going to matter in terms of their day-to-day and how it will help their bottom line. And if you can make that direct connection and correlation to their lives, and they can see how different candidates will make a difference in terms of what the policies and things that will impact their day-to-day, they will figure out how to vote, and they will make it a priority to do it. So that's what the challenge is for those that are leading this charge to do in terms of getting this community to vote and to be more politically active. It's making that connection to recognizing that government decisions do impact, how much taxes they pay, how much benefits they get, how much dollars are going into the communities and to meeting their service needs and things like that. So if you can make that connection, they will figure out how to get to the polls, trust me. So I just wanted to give a little background in terms of some of what's going on in New York City in terms of the overall pot of funding available for social services, because I think that that's important to understand why the dollars aren't necessarily maybe flowing to these organizations. So over the last, since the fiscal crisis hit in 2008, the number of dollars available overall has shrunk considerably in the state and the city and the federal level. I mean, right now, at the federal level, we're looking at sequestration being implemented, so dollars are continuing to shrink that are coming from the feds. And there's important funding streams that fund a lot of social services programs that are going to be reduced. At the state level, in 2010, we closed a $10 billion budget hole with cuts. And so there was over some period of time, there was about $800 million overall lost from just social services. And then at the city level, there's similar numbers, well, lower numbers because it's a smaller population, but in terms of the entire state, but about $160 million have been lost from social services overall over the last couple of years. And that there's a constant struggle for dollars. And what happens is that once a community has a program in place, it's really politically hard to get rid of that program and to move those dollars. And so what needs to happen is there needs to be additional dollars oftentimes to meet new needs, because the person and the people who represent that area where those dollars are, that's say meeting the needs of a African American community, or a program designed 20 years ago, let's say, to meet the needs of a Hispanic community. Their job is to fight like hell to make sure those dollars stay in that community, and they're going to do that. And so politically, it's almost impossible to get those dollars to shrink and to reallocate them to new and growing needs. And so in a time when the pie is shrinking and the amount of dollars available, that's sort of where the rub is. And so you're not going to be able to see the dollars going into the Asian-led programs as easily, because we're in a fiscally tight moment. Had this conversation been going on maybe, and the growing numbers been available maybe in the 2000s when times were booming, it might have been a little bit easier to put more dollars into some of those programs. But it's more difficult at this moment in time. And then I would just say also that because of the fiscal crisis, the trend by city and state agencies is to, when they're re-RFPing or doing the request for proposals for new contracts, the trend is to create larger contracts and fewer providers, which again creates more competition, and that makes it again harder for Asian-led organizations to compete. The other thing is, be careful what you wish for. Government contracts do not pay the cost of doing business, right? So you have to, as an organization, have enough funds to supplement the contract that you're getting with the government in order to carry that out, and that makes it harder for you to compete if you don't have a long history and you don't have discretionary funds on your side to really supplement that government contract. It's an unfortunate situation and problem, but government contracts certainly do not pay the full cost of doing business. And that's something that the nonprofit sector overall is struggling with. The other thing I would say also is that there's this great thing called member items that are available and are there for council members to meet the needs in their communities. But they have disappeared at the state level. So in 2010, Governor Patterson got rid of them, and they have not come back. And so the number of discretionary funds have disappeared. And at the city level, they've stayed pretty flat because there's a lot of public scrutiny around them, because there's a few bad apples, and they've been used, in a few instances inappropriately. But I would definitely argue, and I argued this publicly all the time, that the vast majority of those dollars are used appropriately and used for needs that aren't able to be met otherwise by large contracts that are put out in other, more formal ways by the city. And so it's really important that we all stand up for member items because they do allow growing and new needs to be met. When I talked earlier about the sort of, how government takes a while to catch up and reallocate dollars. Well, member items are a small fix to that problem. And so we need to make sure that we're supportive of them and we make sure that they're not disappearing, which there are, calls more and more for them to disappear. The Post would love to see what they call pork just go away, and that's not going to be helpful to meeting social service needs for this particular community. And then I would just say overall, in terms of some of the numbers you were talking about, Howard, in terms of where the Asian community is in terms of poverty rates and housing and things like that. I mean, if you put that in the context of overall, poverty rates in the city, are up overall. And so just to put it in that context, I think is important. It's, there are fewer jobs available. There's more competition for the jobs that are available. The jobs that are available overall are paying less, so a lot of people are working and not making ends meet. This is a context that has not been, it's a kind of a new context for New York City. We have a homeless rate that's higher than it's ever been, well, except maybe during the Great Depression. So I just think it's important to remember that the entire city is not doing well, and so that makes it even more difficult for a particular community. So I see I have 1 minute left. I just would want to say that, so what do you do about this? I think you advocate. You guys have to organize. I think you're doing that. I see, like the 13% and Growing Coalition. I see a lot of organizing in this community, and I think it's fantastic, and it has to be kept up. And be relentless. Appreciate the small wins that you get, because that's what you have to hold on to and have to move yourselves forward. I do think that social policy will change and meet the specific needs of this community over time. I just think that it will take some time because of the fight for dollars, and but I think that you will get there. So that's my spiel, and thank you again for having me speak.
Thanks, Allison. That was a local snapshot on exactly what's going on in DC. I think that we are facing sequestration, and I think almost all of the policy advocacy work that we do is not just for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. It is done in coalition to really grow the pie and to not sort of continue this intense competition, particularly amongst low-income communities and communities of color. So definitely hear that. But it's also like, what kind of society do we want to live in, and are we okay with an entire segment of a particular community not doing okay until there's more resources, and trying to figure out how we stand for the broader issues and ensuring that our community's needs are also met. So I'm going to turn now to Seema, and Seema is again with Chaya CDC and has been doing awesome work in all of these spaces in policy and advocacy, civic engagement, and direct services. So Seema.
Thank you, Lisa. Yes, so as you can see, Chaya is placed very well in a district with a council member who really, we're very fortunate that he is not only conscious of our community, but really is an advocate, and unfortunately, I don't think all of our communities have the same kind of representation. And so conferences like this are really great to educate our elected officials as well. So thank you and congratulations to AAFE for that. So after hearing my fellow panelists' remarks, I want to change everything that I had to say, but I'll stick to a few things. One is that, as our communities have continued to grow, and we see that the growth rates are extremely high, it's also becoming increasingly diverse in New York City, and this poses a lot of challenges in terms of services and organizing, but it also creates a lot of opportunity for us as an Asian American community, and how we can sort of work together to build collective power and also get those resources into our communities that really do need the support. I think that we really need to think strategically about our diversity rather than try to pretend that we are all the same. Let's embrace that we are a diverse group within the Asian American community and sort of just think strategically about how we work together to get resources into these communities. And I think what that means is that we do, have to work in coalition. We have to support the growth of emerging groups and also those that are most marginalized within our communities. Chaya itself grew out of AAFE a long time ago, and to AAFE's credit, supported its growth. And I think now that we are sort of not fully grown up, but teenagers, I would say that it's our duty to support the growth of newer groups that are emerging in communities like the Nepali community that is growing very rapidly. On the city and state level, our numbers are much more pronounced, right? The 13% and growing coalition has, in a very savvy way, educated the entire city and maybe across the country about what the percentage of Asian Americans are in New York City. But they also remind us how little resources have really come into our communities. And so yes, change takes time. However, I do feel that these are public resources, and it is our responsibility to make sure that those public resources get into our communities. And so that's our duty. Nobody else is going to do it for us. And so that's why the organizing work needs to be supported, and also we need to also build up the sophisticated machines that are needed to also fight for those resources. So I would say change really does need to happen. We need to work within our communities to build the sort of support systems that are needed. So not just, organizations like the Italian American Senior Center that Councilman Drum mentioned. It's great that they have changed with the times and opened up their doors to new communities that have come into that neighborhood. But what have they done in terms of their board? What have they done in terms of their membership? Maybe they should think about changing their name. I don't know anything about this organization, but I'm saying that it's the responsibility of those organizations to not just serve the new communities, but also, we need to support the development of leadership. And so with that comes either groups within the Asian American community need to grow and build up that capacity, or the existing groups that are using those resources have that responsibility to also go beyond just services, I would say. Okay, so I will keep going. I guess I already made this point, but in terms of, I think the Asian American community has benefited a great deal from the work of the African American community, the civil rights movement. We certainly sit on the shoulders of those movements. However, I will reiterate that I think our Asian American community is much more diverse, and we cannot just replicate those models, right? The way the organizing happened within the civil rights movement, within the African American community, there's certainly a lot of lessons there. However, because of our diversity, because of the challenges we face, we need to come up with our own models and our own ways of doing that type of organizing work that not just uplifts one community, but all of our communities together. In terms of the data that Howard presented, I think that it does sort of show the cross-cutting issues that we have within the Asian American groups. We have challenges of home ownership, housing, entrepreneurship, and language access. Those are all issues that we need to work on together. Looking at it in more detail and looking at the nuances is really where we can also complement that research, right? I mean, Chaya has done a lot of work around the foreclosure crisis, and really a lot of our own data really helped us to get to where we needed to go. We actually looked at names of people who were facing default and found the percentages that were South Asian in order to really make those arguments for ourselves. So I think that we need to look at the nuances by community. We need to look at the data in, by ethnic group, but then also cohesively. Also, it works beyond the racial lines. For example, if you look at household income alone, it really makes Asian Americans look like they're doing well, but when you break it down by the number of household members within, that are relying on that individual income, the picture looks very different. So those are the things that we can do in terms of on the ground, sort of look at the data more in detail and tell the stories of our communities. You know, the Indo-Caribbean community is potentially the largest South Asian group in New York City, and we have no data on it. And so that's something that we can really work on to really go into more detail about the, you know, what the census numbers are telling us. So yes, continue working across lines within the Asian American groups, and then also with, you know, we need to, of course, work with the African American and Latino communities across racial lines as well, in order to really advocate for greater investment in, you know, our communities. Thank you.
Thanks, Seema. Seema is an awesome national leader, and it definitely makes a difference when she wears both hats. When she represents Chaya and New York and the South Asian community from the local level and all the work that they do, and also sits at the table as the National Capacity Board Chair, and to really have both of those perspectives guiding our work to bring community voices to impact federal policy and also state and local policy, I think is just really great. So thanks, Seema. We're going to wrap it up with Isabel Layton. Isabel is with AAFE, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in Philanthropy, an organization that I've worked a lot with over the years and across the country. And so Isabel, excuse me, is going to be talking to us a little bit about the role of philanthropy in all of this, and just some trends and some perspectives from that regard. So, Isabel.
Hello, everybody. So last night I went to an amateur comedy night, and I realized how horrible the material was, and I thought, wow, what a great opportunity. Here I am with a mic first thing in the morning. I could just really practice and maybe work on some better material, use some stats. Just kidding. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be doing this today. When Douglas and Peter reached out to me to ask me to participate in this, I thought, oh great, I'm going to be in a small room, a workshop, talking to other foundations about how to strategize and get more resources into our community. Wonderful. I didn't realize I'd be sitting up here with these amazing panelists talking about how to set the stage for a conversation about equality for the next day. But needless to say, I'm really proud to be participating. I'm also proud that in New York City, and we have an institution like AAFE where we really do focus on equality, and that we have a community such as ours where the core of what we aim to do is to have equality be ubiquitous. Yesterday, I went to a small gathering at a place called A Better Chance, and the topic of discussion was around how better to bridge the higher education gap in low-income communities of color. The majority of the people in the room were African American leaders with incredible accomplishments under their belts. Even with their success, they still came back to the same point that on this pipeline of achievement, where you begin and where you end from childhood, and also when you come back to the community after your careers, your communities are still not achieving as well as you did as an individual. So essentially, if we don't examine or focus on the communities in which we are currently living, the success of an individual is not going to be success for an individual. It's not going to be success for your families, and it's not going to be success overall. Now, I come from a perspective talking about philanthropy. If you say, okay, individuals, they are 15% of, they raise 15% of all of the resources. The majority of the resources are in public goods. Now, those public dollars need to be allocated properly. What I want to talk about today is from three perspectives, the ways in which you can participate in allocating dollars. I wear two hats today. I wear one as the New York City co-chair for Asian American Pacific Islanders in Philanthropy, and I also work at a small community foundation called North Star Fund. First, from a national perspective, AAFE is participating or created a campaign called First Step. It's a public-private partnership that came out of a convening back last year, April 2nd, 2012, where the White House Initiative for Asian American Pacific Islanders brought together 200 people. I'm sure all of you guys heard about this. Yes, nods, yeah, no. Nationally, they brought together leaders to talk about 6 areas to improve in Asian American communities. It was around science, education, community development, social services, and arts, and I can't remember the 6th one right now. But basically, we all participated in a day-long set of workshops and thought experiments about how best to reallocate the limited dollars. And then at the end, we all thought, oh, wow, this is so great. All of us are coming together with the president, and we need to act. We need to move to the next step. So what was announced at the end of this one-day convening was that 3 foundations, Ford, Kresge, and Kellogg, would put on the table $1 million. And here I am thinking, okay, maybe this is just because I'm from New York City and we have these huge budgets, but $1 million to reallocate and change Asian American access to resources in 6 areas, that's nothing. That's less than most of the budgets of everyone working in this in this room today. How could that possibly be the big announcement at the end of the day? So then I found out later, well, wearing my New York City co-chair hat, I thought, okay, I gotta figure out what exactly is gonna happen here. How are those resources gonna come to our communities? And I found out that really what AAFE was doing was, over 3 years, it had been organizing a public-private partnership. It had been working at the national level to allocate resources from private foundations so that they could have a stronger voice in front of public agencies. That's how this convening happened. That's how the First Step campaign happened, which is something that was announced after this April 2nd convening last year. Last fall, we were all supposed to get together and have a small talk about how we're going to engage local communities and where AAFE is going with the next steps. But that was scheduled for October 29th, and we all know what happened on October 29th, so that didn't happen. The process actually has continued. It is a $1 million research project to figure out how best to use resources in a public-private partnership. It's an 18-month process. AAFE National's responsibility is to gather resources from local groups and to really analyze how philanthropy has been using resources to give money to our communities. This all stemmed from Peggy Saika, the executive director's frustration with the fact that although we are 13% of the growing population, less than 1% of all resources, whether they're private, well, mostly we speak from a philanthropic private perspective, are allocated to Asian communities. And the whole idea with a public-private partnership is to see how can we envision if just 1% of philanthropic private dollars were given to our communities. So in some ways it's a thought experiment, but then it brought traction at this national level. The step that all of us in New York can participate in is when this report comes out, I will be very sure that New York City will have a chance to actually participate and respond to this report at the chapter level. And as everyone in this room, if you are working with local communities, serving the API community, you can participate in our chapter activities. The second thing I want to say is that on the local level or regional level, we need to prepare ourselves to work in coalition. I know that this is what everyone has already said, but the key here is to prepare yourself. Now, Organizations, especially, this is where I wear my North Star Fund hat, I speak from a small, grassroots, community-based organization perspective. You often don't have the capacity to respond to rapid, disaster-level change that's needed. You're working on building your communities out, but then all of a sudden, something like Superstorm Sandy hits, and you have to find resources to work together. One of the things that we're doing at North Star Fund is we're creating a community fund for Sandy recovery. We are planning to gather best practices from other places who have responded to storms like Katrina, Irene, Mitch, and we are going to be producing a report so that people can participate in that, and mostly so that we can gather resources to fund local groups that are working in coalition. One of them that's emerging right now is called Alliance for Just Rebuilding. If you are working at a community organization, I would highly suggest you reach out. You can talk to me, and we can find a way to plug you in, because that is where North Star Fund will be fundraising and giving, allocating resources to. We've already given $150,000 to that group, which is all groups that are under $250,000 budgets. The third thing I would say, and I know I'm running out of time, is that you should really participate on the personal and individual level in philanthropy and allocating resources. Yes, there are community, Councilmember Drum is also my council member. I live in Elmhurst. I just moved there 3 weeks ago, so this is a great introduction. So going to those meetings are going to be a new priority for me. But also, as an individual, there are a lot of different ways in New York City to participate in community philanthropy. This is a campaign also that AAFE is doing. That it's a national campaign to build 50 giving circles, and AAFE is going to be matching 50% of each dollar raised, because we want to increase individual participation in philanthropy. And I just want to say that we've already created over 30 of them, and one of them was one that's local here in New York City called the Dinner Guys, which formed in October. And since then, they've already been raising money and have received national recognition. Last week, there was a organization called Boulder Giving that had a one-day give-out day focused on LGBT communities. And even though the Dinner Guys is so small and so new, it was able to place second in number of donors making gifts in New York City, and then 8th nationally. And that's amazing, considering that they were up against some very large organizations with budgets over $1 million. Really the message that was put out there is that that's a grassroots individual effort. Just by putting a small donation, you can actually get very visible. So that will be the end. Those 3 ways of participating are the ways that I would suggest.
Thanks, Isabel. And I'll just fill in a little bit. I used to work at the White House Initiative on APIs and work very closely with them now. I'll say a couple of things about the public-private partnerships and the work with the White House Initiative on APIs and APIP. And then I'm going to turn it over for some questions and answers with the audience. So I'm giving you a little bit of time as I fill in to think about your questions. I also was at that meeting in April at the White House, and I think that the 5 issue areas were sustainable communities, health, education, immigrant integration, and civil and human rights. So those were, it was a really interesting grouping of mostly foundations, but there were also some organizations and community leaders who were also in the room. And I'm happy to say that there's actually been a lot of second and third steps, I hope, after the first step of that $1 million commitment. I know that the Ford Foundation has supported the poverty report that I referenced referenced earlier. We're going to be doing a briefing with a lot of the major foundations, for the first time on this national stage to really make the case of the need for more investments. And the public in this is actually federal agencies and government agencies. So the public-private partnerships, the private sector partners are the philanthropic partners and the nonprofit organizations. The public partners are local government agencies, regional offices of federal government agencies, and also just the headquarters of the federal agencies. And so what we're trying to do is actually bring some of those efforts together, because as you guys know, and I think it was, you guys all talked about how sometimes government funding costs more than you get from it. And so there's a real important role, especially for API organizations, to have some philanthropic and private investments to really bridge to be able to access a lot of the more structured and sometimes costly government services and programs. And so I think that that's why it's going to be really important as this public-private partnership moves forward. Last thing I'll say about the White House Initiative on APIs, you've got an awesome commissioner here in New York, Mei Chen, and then also we have two commissioners on the National Capacity Board who are good friends of SEMA, Heok Kim and Sefa Aina, and they're all commissioners, but their commissions terms are coming to an end in September, and I encourage you all to think about who you would be wanting to represent New York and the various communities from which you come, and so they're going to be taking nominations. So I'm going to open it up for one question to all of you, and then I'm going to ask folks who have questions to start lining up at the mic right here in the front here. So no one's standing up. Questions? Okay. So I'll start off with a question. I thought it was really interesting what Howard had talked about in terms of the change in demographics, and this is what we see happening nationally, where Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in many places around the country, and also I guess here in New York, our Asian American and Pacific Islander communities and neighborhoods are actually growing faster in places that are not necessarily your traditional urban core. And so I think it's been a challenge politically, but also in terms of service organizations that oftentimes have had a more geographic focus. I'd love for you guys to talk a little bit about, what you think needs to happen in New York State to really look at what's going on in other places around the state. And also just in terms of the civic participation, if you could just offer a vision like 10 years from now, what you think it's going to be like for APIs. Howard, you want to take the geographic one first? You've had the longest break.
Is it on? Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, in terms of growth, when we were doing outreach for Census 2010 a couple of years ago, it was very difficult for us to find groups to work with upstate. We had, our funder gave us money to grant it to different groups, and a lot of them ended up being civic organizations. And what we're seeing, certainly in terms of the data, is an increasing need for more social service-oriented organizations. So then that becomes an issue of how do you get these groups started? What kind of funding sources can you bring to the table? And it's an issue that we want to take a look at, but certainly resources aren't there. And in particular, there's a lot of refugee communities up there, especially. Mm-hmm. If you look at the immigration data, there are a couple of groups, particularly the Burmese and Bhutanese, who've arrived in the country basically within the last 4 or 5 years. And so while there are refugee resettlement agencies that help those people initially, there needs to be sort of a core long-term support system in place for those groups.
So I would say that there needs to be some advocacy and communication to government policymakers around the need to adapt and change our existing social services structure to meet the needs of this particular community. I mean, I think a lot of our approaches to poverty or the various social problems that our social services safety net aims to address had in mind totally different populations which have totally different cultural things and that they're dealing with. I mean, if you look at a lot of our policies related to poverty, they were created a while ago with the history of African Americans in mind, a lot of them. And there are completely different cultural things that are being dealt with this community. Clearly the data shows that. And so I think there has to be some advocacy, not only to add, on top of, but to also look at our existing policies and have them be adapted to keep up with the changes, that there's new populations who have different cultural backgrounds and who have, there's going to have to be different approaches that are taken. I mean, like one example is, my understanding from reading some of the stuff is that there's culturally, for mental health services, there's a stigma in a lot of the Asian communities to getting mental health services. So if that community, if the aim is to get the services to that population, you have to change the approach because it's not going to work the way it currently exists, because you have to deal with that hurdle in a different way. So that's just one example. So I think our existing policies need to adapt, and that there needs to be advocacy to communicate that to government, because they're not going to know that on their own.
Any other comments and people questions? Okay, Wendy, go ahead.
Thanks. I thought this panel was fascinating, so I just want to thank you all. I guess I have a question, and this is from the personal end, but we talk a lot, and I thought the demographic stuff was really fascinating. But one of the things that we're not touching on at all is that Asian Americans are out-marrying at a pretty rapid rate. And so what does that do to the demographics? What does that do to sort of the identity politics, as we see both Native Americans, native-born as well as immigrants beginning to out-marry and redefining what it means to be Asian American, both in the city and the state?
Great question. We wonder if in 10 years we're not national capacity anymore, ethnic specific. Yeah, exactly. Any comments from that? Come on, Seema.
I mean, the mixed race category in New York City and nationally obviously is growing. I think that, there still is a continuing need for in language and culturally competent work. However, that's a good thing. I think that their communities are diversifying, and it'll help build bridges across communities in many ways. What that means for our work as organizations, they say the goal of every nonprofit is to work yourself out of business. Maybe that'll happen eventually. But I do think that there are a lot of issues that emerge when that kind of interethnic marriage happens with child rearing and things like that. So we should probably think about those types of issues and services that are. Oh yeah. Well,
Howard can talk about that.
Yeah, so all of the data that I presented, we purposely chose the categories as including both single race and multiracial Asians. And so you sort of have to, as a community, continually to self-identify as Asian, and then that'll be captured in the data. And the other thing is that when you look at sort of the total population of mixed race, it again varies depending on ethnic groups. For example, among Japanese Americans, if you don't include the multiracial data, you almost cut the population in half. So, but for some of the newer groups, it's still pretty much consistently single race. You're starting to see a little bit of mixing, but not quite to the certain extent that the Japanese have seen.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think that, there are a lot of Asian and something else, or mixed Asian, actually, more leaders, in the community that are playing a really critical role in terms of bridging and really shaping more of a common cause. There are several folks in DC who are part Asian and part Native American. And so I think that there are those opportunities to really do a lot of that bridging, and to say that, we're not a monolithic community. Multiracial people are definitely a part of our community, and also that it just more people in our community have those shared experiences and growing up in different communities of color as well. So I think that that's been an interesting dynamic more and more in DC as well. Isabel, did you have anything to say on this issue?
Yeah, well, so I grew up with that experience.
Yeah.
It's very fascinating because when I was growing up, it wasn't, you had to choose either or. And so I just incensed all this paperwork that you have to do. So I just chose not to reply. But now that basically our communities are becoming more visible and there is an acknowledgement of mixed race groups, I think it's easier to find resources. And also, I actually think, second what Seema was saying, I think it's actually a good thing because we're now able to influence the more dominant culture in a way that is not, hasn't happened in the past. And I think that there's a lot of ways in which, APIs have been stereotyped, and those barriers are probably going to be broken down a lot more now that we're becoming more diverse.
Yeah. Yeah, I think more and more I see people who are like Asian and Latino or Asian and African American who are working for Latino or African American organizations who sort of come out as being half Asian and really are starting to identify and appreciating the growth in the community and feeling like they can really talk about both parts of their lives. So it's great. I think it's a great question and something that we're going to be definitely grappling with over the next couple of years. Other questions? Otherwise, I'm going to ask another one. Yes, come up to the mic and introduce yourself. Oh, there's another mic right there. Great.
My name's Orby, so nice to meet you.
Hi.
Thank you so much for your comments. I wanted to ask how you see technology shaping communicating messages to not only policymakers, but also to the communities you're trying to reach, and maybe how you do it and your organizations do it, but also innovative ways you've seen other organizations do it, or things that you see needing to be done in the future.
Great question. Who wants to take that first? Seema, you can talk about robocalling. No, I'm just kidding.
I feel like I should defer to my colleague Russell Rahman, who's here. Facebook has been extremely helpful to Chaya, actually. I was very skeptical at first, saying that our communities, we can't just use an online strategy to reach them. However, more and more so, I do think that is a very effective tool. We come from communities that are communicating across all sorts of borders, right? And so people are using technology to talk to family back home, and so they are comfortable with certain forms of technology, and it has been extremely helpful to us in our organizing work. I've always wanted to try the text messaging sort of approach in our organizing work. Have not yet done it, but I think it would probably work very well.
Yeah. Other comments on technology?
I'll say a couple things.
Sure.
Well, so the texting thing, yeah, as a foundation that fundraises, we always talk about this text to give idea, and it just never is worth the money for some reason. I'm not sure why. But I guess the thing that I would say, and I know you've probably all seen this, is how ubiquitous YouTube and video has been. I think that it's really, really, on two fronts, really beneficial. One is that it puts a face to all of our communities, and people can actually see who we're talking about. It's not just a statistic, it's not just charts. And the second thing is, when we have PSAs and ways to hold injustice accountable using video, it really makes a difference. We've seen this happen with, there's an organization called Breakthrough, which I know probably a lot of you know about, where they use multimedia and video. They've been creating music videos to kind of face domestic violence and in 30 seconds demonstrate what one person can do. They have a campaign called Bell Bajao, which is like ring the bell. And the second thing is with the police reform against police brutality that's happening, the coalition work that's called Communities United for Police Reform, CPR, they've been using a lot of mobile videotaping, and I think that's really useful.
For accountability, yeah. That's a great question. Thank you. Other questions? Okay, one more question right there.
Yeah, hello, I'm Elizabeth Malone from the New York Mortgage Coalition, and both Chaya and AAFE are members of our coalition. So like, collaboration is in our DNA, but I'd like you to comment a little on the challenges of collaboration. We have seen this growth of RFPs that want groups to work together. Some have been successful, some have not. So if we could speak to some of the experiences on that, I'd be interested. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. And then I'm going to also ask you guys, because this will probably be the last question, to just also maybe share your thoughts in terms of the collaboration within API communities and also with other communities of color and other allies, because I definitely think that that's been a theme here. And given the tough times, I think we have to do that, but I'd love your thoughts.
Sorry, I feel like I'm hogging the mic here.
Daniel, Seema, Daniel, we haven't heard from Daniel either.
Well, I mean, just quickly, I'll say that, collaborative approaches to particularly government funding have been one of the ways that we've been able to access larger pools of public resources by pooling strategies with other groups. I think that it does work. Administratively, it does become challenging at times because one group does have to take on the responsibility of making sure everything happens. However, I do think that it's one way that, particularly smaller groups that are working with emerging communities can really access some of those public resources. So I don't know if you want to comment to it.
I always think of everything from a political perspective, so collaboration is extremely important, but extremely difficult at times, and I think a lot of it comes from being uncomfortable with going outside of your own group and trying to work with others and putting ego aside and things like that. But I remember when I first did get involved in politics in 1992, and there was a young Latino gay man who was killed in Jackson Heights in a hate crime. And, I'm white, obviously, and Julio was Latino. And people, told me at that time, don't stick with your own group, go out and work with others. And that's kind of been my mantra ever since I got involved in politics. And even though it was uncomfortable at times to, do that, I kind of forced myself. And actually, I think in the long run, that's probably why I won my race for city council. And I particularly think of this one forum that we had in Jackson Heights, where all of the Asian groups came together, and I think it was a turning point in my election. I beat an incumbent, and that's very hard to do in New York City, to beat an incumbent. But her answers at that forum were pretty horrible, and she exposed herself. And when groups come together like that, they can create change. And hopefully I have been somebody who has stuck to my word for the things that I said at that forum. And I think that because I had my fingers in immigrant communities, whereas my predecessor did not, that was really the reason why I was victorious in winning the race that I did.
Thanks. Allison, did you want to comment?
So I'm all about collaboration. My organization represents all types of human service providers in New York City, different umbrella groups, Asians, Hispanics, Black, it's everybody, as well as different subsectors, and there's always competition for what are the priorities going to be, what's our messaging going to be, all of those things. And I think it's absolutely critical that you work those things out in advance of talking to policymakers and that you all get on the same page, because as much as there's so much diversity within diversity within diversity, there are so many people knocking on, and different special interests knocking on the door of government, that for a particular group to have to get together in advance, if your messaging is not dead on and it's not consistent, it's going to get lost. And so you have to make sure that you sort of don't air your dirty laundry, that you get on the same page in advance, and that you get as many people together and on the same page, and have your fights internally, get them out, and then get on the same page, and then talk to government. And I think that that's a critical lesson that everybody that's trying to move public policy needs to keep in mind all the time.
Thank you all for your comments. I'll just leave with some of my own thoughts on that. You know, we're right now, what's the big thing in Washington, D.C.? Immigration reform. And I think that in terms of the collaboration, all the groundwork that's had to be done, working with labor, really building bridges with the African American community. I know that, so how many of you guys came to last year's convention? I think Mark Morial was one of your keynote speakers, and one of the things about the National Urban League, it was founded as a migrant services organization. You know, certainly there are common histories, there are shared histories and common interests moving forward. You know, we're hearing about a new coalition, campaign called First Americans for New Americans, talking about Native Americans, Alaskan Natives, and Native Hawaiians that are going to be coming out for immigration reform, and them really pushing and mobilizing their Republican senators towards immigration reform. So I really feel like collaboration, working with other communities of color, other allies, we don't have a choice. Well, the choice is to fight amongst each other, and I don't think that that's where we need to focus our energy. I think that the work that AAFE's been doing, all of the panelists have been doing, is very inspiring. So for all of you in the audience, I say take it to your local elected officials, talk first before you go to them, as Allison said. You know, your appointees locally, statewide, nationally, there's never been more representation of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in Congress, and also in local elected positions and in appointed positions. They need you. National capacity was founded on the idea that some of the best public policy and some of the smartest ideas come from the ground and not from the folks in DC. The folks in Washington, DC often don't recognize or serve Asian American and Pacific Islander communities because they just don't know. And as soon as they have someone to partner with who they can really say is an expert, things start to change. So I'm telling you that as dire as things may seem, I think for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, there's a lot of work and space to move and to do a lot together to make things better for not just our own communities, but for everyone. And so with that, I'll end the panel. Thank you guys very much. If you guys could just help me give them a hand. Thank you. And I'm going to turn it back over to Doug, and thank you for your attention this morning.
So I want to again thank Lisa, Howard, Allison, Seema, Danny, and Isabel for really making data actually very accessible but interesting on a Tuesday morning, and also bringing all their insights and experiences in terms of what's really happening on the ground and in the communities, at City Hall, and a little bit what's happening in Albany and DC. So with that, I'd like to transition our conference onto our morning workshop sessions. We have 3 workshops. One is right across the hall. It's going to focus on adaptive reuse as a tool for community revitalization. And we have 2 on the 9th floor, and our staff ushers can help you get there, just up the elevators. One is a really interesting one around innovative strategies for poverty alleviation, both the good and tried and true strategies, but also some new issues happening in the field. And of course, the deep conversation around the opportunity for comprehensive immigration reform. So those workshops will start at 11. And then we'll come back here at 12:30 for a keynote from Darrell Towns, who's the Commissioner for New York State Homes and Community Renewal. For those of you outside of the housing field, that's the state public agency that really is responsible for everything from rent regulation to mortgages and home ownership. So thank you, and we'll see you back here at 12:30. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We'd like to get started with the afternoon program. So as you settle in, find a seat, I just want to let you know that we will get started. So we have a very exciting luncheon planned for you all today. Not only are we hearing from one of our recognized state leaders, Commissioner Darrell Towns of New York State HCR, we're also recognizing a number of AAFE's youth leaders based at Flushing High School, and hearing from a panel of experts from around the city who wear many different hats, who will really talk about what's on, I think, many of our minds, what's at stake for the local elections in 2013. Before we get started, I would like to recognize some of our longtime sponsors of the conference and of AAFE, David Applebaum and Mark Castle from BNY Mellon. Anthony Borelli and his whole crew from Edison Properties. Marie Pedraza, who is an AAFE board member, but also a sponsor from HSBC. And I'd also like to invite Anna Mock to the stage to say a few words from our main sponsor, New York Community Bank. Anna.
Hello, everybody. I'm Anna Mack. I'm one of the relationship officer at New York Community Bank. And on behalf of the bank, we want to welcome everybody to the AAFE 6th Annual Asian American Development Conference. As proud lead sponsor, we want to wish AAFE all the best. And New York Community Bank will continue to support all the wonderful events that you guys have upcoming. Thank you.
So to get us started, I'd like to actually take a moment. We want to recognize, every year we try to recognize really the young people that we work with on a daily basis. You know, AAFE as an organization, we work in everything from home ownership to small business, community organizing, policy advocacy, but really taking the time with all of our friends here at the conference each year to recognize just some of the many young people we work with. The 5 young people you'll meet today are all youth leaders with our College and Career Pathways Center based at Flushing High School. They are 5 Flushing High School students themselves, and over the past year, they've actually been working as peer college advisors. They themselves also from this experience, helping more than 500 of their peers apply for college, fill out the FAFSA, do research on which schools and scholarships, and they've actually logged over 500 hours of service to their school community. So I'd like to invite them to the stage to recognize them. AAFE youth leaders, can we give them a round of applause? There we go. Just switch it around later. So let me introduce you to Sam, Haiti, Risa, Afia, and Rue. They've all completed their year of service this June, and next year we'll actually be recruiting 5 additional youth leaders at Flushing High School, as well as hopefully expanding our program at another partner school we work with at Flushing International High School. So, you know, I think all of us as immigrants, as children of immigrants, as people who live and breathe our communities, it's so vital that people who live and work in the community are actually out there serving and giving back to the community. So we really want to lift up their amazing work that happens every day at the school. And, you know, maybe 5-10 years from now, who knows where we'll see them. So please help me in giving them a round of applause. Thank you. Congrats, guys. Next, I'd like to ask an ally to AAFE and a strong community leader who's from Albany, Assemblymember Ron Kim, to introduce our keynote speaker.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Doug, and thank you, AAFE, for holding the 6th Annual Community Development Conference. And I want to thank also all the sponsors and all the participants for making another successful year. Today, I have the privilege of introducing Darrell Towns. He is the Commissioner and CEO of the New York State Home and Renewal Agency. This is an agency that oversees all the housing and renewal-related agencies and commissions in the state of New York. This was created to make things more efficient for people in the housing and the affordable housing and tenants' right and everything related to housing in the state of New York. And before he joined as the CEO and commissioner of HCR in 2011, he served 18 years in the State Assembly, from 1993 to 2011, where he also chaired the Committee on Mass Transit, and he was also the chairman of the Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus in the State Assembly. He is an amazing, great advocate for the Asian American community, and it's his position that he holds right now is very germane to the mission of AAFE, where Asian Americans for Equality and many other Asian groups in this room deal with affordable housing issues and other issues related to affordable housing, such as tenants' rights. With that, I'd like to bring up Commissioner Darrell Towns, and please put your hands together and welcome him to the stage.
Thank you very much, Assemblyman, for that great introduction. And let me first say good afternoon to everyone. To the Assemblyman, who is off to a great start in his tenure in Albany. I actually, as I was listening to you talk about my tenure serving as the chair of the Black and Puerto Rican, Hispanic and Asian Caucus, that I was actually a part of that organization through its 3 name changes. So when I first got elected, it was the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus. And then we got our first Dominican American elected and became the Black, Puerto Rican, and Hispanic Caucus. And of course, subsequent Asian membership, the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Caucus. And I'm sure that we'll be looking to join Pacific, whatever else it is that we have out there, because it is a collective of people who are representing those who have challenges in fully living the American dream. And I think that the spirit in which I serve that organization, I'm sure that you're continuing in that regard as well. Also, you've got big shoes because my good friend Grace Meng graced us for a long time in that seat, so I'm sure that you'll be making sure that that advocacy grows. Thank you as well to Chris and Doug and all of you who are here. It is a pleasure to be here to represent the governor here at AAFE, which is a great organization with a strong history of community development throughout the neighborhoods around New York City. AAFE started near us here in Chinatown, but as Asian American communities grew, the organization has grown as well, spreading its wings and influence across the boroughs, the city, and of course the state of New York. I consider nonprofit organizations as effective as AAFE to be our partners who get things done, and that know and understand Governor Andrew Cuomo's and HCR's vision for creating affordable homes, vibrant communities, and strong local economies across New York City and New York State. You're delivering that vision every day. So I send greetings from the governor and want to also acknowledge Linda Sun from the governor's office, if she's here. Linda, are you here? There she is, and who is also here. Also want to acknowledge my Deputy Commissioner, Chris Brown, who's our Public Information Officer, who's also joining us today. So it's been an interesting and very challenging year in the affordable housing and community renewal world, as I'm sure all of you would agree. Under the leadership of Governor Cuomo, the work we do has risen to a new level, and the importance of affordable housing to strong economies has never been more evident. We saw this all over New York State in 2011 when disasters in the form of Irene, Lee, and then again downstate last fall when Sandy struck. Houses, neighborhoods, and local economies were devastated. And we all received a harsh reminder of how stable homes are the first ingredient of healthy communities. But we are building with the help of our federal partners, and New York will come back and come back even stronger than before. Our partnerships are the key, and at the direction of the governor, we have committed as a state to pool various state agency resources for housing and economic development projects, and we are targeting them in smart and efficient ways that make a difference for New Yorkers. Specifically, HCR will be central to the state's effort to use $1.7 billion in community development block grant dollars to get roads built and businesses back open, and of course to make sure that we rebuild housing, but not just rebuilding the same way, because as the governor has noted, climate change is real, and we need to be better prepared for the next storm, as there will be a next storm. One technical point, the $1.7 billion in community development block grant funds that HCR will administer in the counties around New York City comes in addition to another $1.77 billion that HUD separately awarded New York City last week. So for most communities that AAFE serves, you will continue to work with the city government partners handling storm recovery. And I know the devastation of Sandy was felt hard in Manhattan and communities AAFE serves so well. In Lower Manhattan, HCR's own buildings at Beaver Street were without power for over a month. And I know AAFE also suffered the same fate at its own offices, which are not far away. But the organization kept its doors open, providing basic services to flooded communities under some tough working conditions. AAFE's efforts deserve your applause, certainly. For a moment, let me just give a quick overview of some of HCR's other work in my 2 years at the agency, because even prior to the storms, New York State Homes and Community Renewal has been keeping very busy as part of a reinvigorated state government. Over the past 2 years, the governor and legislature worked together to close a budget deficit larger than $11 billion that would have easily grown to $18 billion this year had serious action not been taken. Instead, the budget that Assemblyman Kim and his colleagues passed in March closed a $1.3 billion gap by continuing to implement smart strategies and efficiencies, all without raising taxes. This is real progress. HCR continued our progress by using resources wisely, collaborating with partners, and keeping homes affordable and communities strong throughout sound management of a portfolio of more than 190,000 multifamily units, administering more than $1.5 billion each year to expand affordable housing opportunities and build strong communities, preserving Mitchell-Lama developments at Co-op City in the Bronx and Island House on Roosevelt Island. As you know, one of the governor's major themes for this legislative session, advanced in both the State of the State as well as his budget address, was for state government to continue working aggressively to help New Yorkers through investments in affordable housing, while at the same time responding vigorously and effectively to the housing crisis of the storms I just mentioned. I am proud that HCR will play a central role in elements of the new budget that will keep, in the governor's words, New York rising. First, recognizing the role that affordable housing plays in keeping New York State vibrant and livable, the governor's budget called for an unprecedented $1 billion investment over the next 5 years dedicated to creating and preserving more than 14,000 housing units. Of those 14,000 units, many may be Mitchell-Lama units that were previously administered by the Empire State Development Corporation, a sister agency in the state. HCR now has the resources to take over many of these aging developments and using what we have already learned in places like Co-op City to bring new life into developments that have proved critical to protecting the middle class. So House New York program is the largest state investment in affordable housing in at least 15 years, and it comes on top of HCR's annual base funding. It confirms the governor's commitment to meeting the affordable housing needs and driving economic activity and job growth in struggling communities around the state. And of course, House New York builds on the administration's other groundbreaking efforts to protect renters. Speaking of which, perhaps the most enduring HCR initiative undertaken since I've come to the agency has been around rent regulation. In 2011, the state renewed its rent laws, passing new and stronger rent regulations after decades of seeing them continually weakened. We are now employing new measures to strengthen protections for the state's 1 million rent-regulated tenants, many of them served by AAFE. Among the most important changes, the new law raised the deregulation rent threshold from $2,000 to $2,500, and also raised the income threshold from $175,000 to $200,000, the first changes in either threshold since the 1990s. These changes are ensuring that almost 100,000 units will stay in the rent regulation system over the next few years and remain available to working-class New Yorkers. Another important change this law made is allowing landlords to collect only one vacancy bonus per year, reducing the manipulation of leases in order to push out units from the system. Finally, the law also makes important changes to the way improvements are calculated and verified for individual apartments, which is reducing a landlord's ability to use renovations as a tool to force units out of regulation. Taken together, these changes represented a historic new direction of our rent laws, significantly leveling the playing field between the landlord and tenant. Assemblymember Kim mentioned my years in the Assembly, and I speak from both legislative and executive experience when I say that the law that Governor Cuomo and the legislature produced in 2011 was the most positive news for rent-regulated tenants in over 35 years. But more importantly, it sent the clear signal that this government will protect our middle and working class families, ensuring our families are able to afford to live here in the Empire State. Since the law passed, our Office of Rent Administration has had its hands full. In fact, we're currently in a public comment period for the actual regulations that need to be updated as a result of the new law. We believe that in the new regs governing the rent laws will continue to be a major step in a positive direction. And we are strongly encouraging tenant advocates and everyone else who takes a strong interest in rent regulation to use your right to publicly comment on the regs by June 14th, submission deadline. More details are available on our website. But I know you're also interested in another related and major initiative under Governor Cuomo, the creation and full staffing of the Tenant Protection Unit, also known as the TPU, which was created last year to change a complaint-driven enforcement system around regulation to being one that's more of a proactive enforcement. The TPU has also been busy in a new charge and is already getting results. Its major activity has involved conducting a random audit of building owners who failed to register properties in the last 4 years as required by law. The TPU has also audited owners requesting proof of work done in the apartment improvements that significantly raised rents and had been used in the past to move units out of regulation. For the first time ever, subpoenas were sent to owners who failed to comply with the TPU's request for the required proof that these apartments had indeed been improved. As a result, more than 15,000 apartments have been re-registered and added back to the rent rolls throughout the state of New York. As we had seen in a steady erosion of the rent-stabilized apartments in the previous decade, this is a major accomplishment. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the agency's efforts to expand language access in those areas which we have the most interaction with the public. The Cuomo administration has recognized language access as a priority, and especially around rent administration, where the number of non-English speakers dealing with our agency is greatest. We at HCR know that a public unable to interact with its government is not able to be served by that government. So as part of our agency language access plan, we have endeavored to expand language access at our Office of Rent Administration borough centers, both in our publications and in staff who deal with the public. And on our website, we have added Google Translation to be part of our web pages that feature the most critical information and documents. So whether you speak Chinese, Spanish, Russian, or several other languages, you have the ability to better understand our website and interact with us. Google is not perfect, of course, but I'm confident it is allowing us to improve our critical efforts. Going forward, HCR will continue other important work that I did not discuss today, including increasing the number of supportive housing units in New York, as Governor Cuomo has made an integral commitment through his Medicaid redesign team. We will also continue to work on the governor's goals for minority and women business enterprise of 20%. The agencies under HCR's umbrella are already operating at 18% MWBE participation across our agencies, putting us way ahead of the game, but still with a little more to achieve. Again, as I mentioned, we will work to preserve the Mitchell-Lama portfolio as part of the latest budget's efforts. Keep this critical affordable housing option available to working class families, and through strengthening regulation and expanded enforcement, we will continue to focus on the needs of rent-regulated tenants around the city and state. And of course, we will continue to become more resilient, to build better and smarter, so that we can be prepared for anything nature puts in a path. So thank you once again for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of the governor. And also, if you would allow me, Chris, I guess to Doug, the governor has sent a letter commemorating this date. If you would like to come up and accept it. Again, thank you on behalf of all that you do.
Right, thank you.
And the state continues to be a partner. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I just want to mention, that actually, AAFE received an award recently of $600,000, from the agency to actually work with the, Sandy affected homeowners, and then so most of the bulk of the funding is going to be grants to, qualified homeowners who are in need of repair of their homes that were damaged by Sandy. So again, thank you so much, and for the support, and then also the, our work together over the years, and then we'll continue. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So to move us right along, I'd like to invite our plenary panelists, Maria Castaneda, Wayne Ho, Bill Chong, and Benjamin Dalchin up to the stage. So I have to say that, the folks on this panel today are some of my favorite New Yorkers because while some folks we work with on a day-to-day basis, others, we know they're out there fighting the good fight, not only in the role they play in their 9 to 5 or 9 to 9, 9 to 10 jobs, but also in the community as everyday New Yorkers as well. So in brief, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. First, Benjamin Dalchin, who's the Executive Director of the Association for Neighborhood Housing and Development, also known as ANHD. And ANHD is actually a membership organization of more than 90 community-based groups in New York City committed to preserving and producing affordable housing, and of which AAFE, of course, is a member. I'd also like to introduce Bill Chong from the New York City Department of Aging. Bill has a long career in public service, including former leadership positions with the New York City Department of Youth and Community Development, as well as HUD under Secretary Cisneros and Secretary Cuomo. Maria Castaneda is the Secretary and Treasurer of SEIU 1199, a nurse by training, now an organizer and a labor leader nationally. We're very honored to have her as part of this afternoon's panel. And last but not least, Wayne Ho, who's the Executive Director of the Coalition for Asian American Children and Families. CACF is also a membership-based organization of Asian-led, Asian-serving organizations across New York City. And he and his amazing staff really fight every day to make sure that our needs as a community organizations are represented at City Hall and up in Albany. So let's give them a round of applause and welcome to the panel. So the real question today is, what is at stake for the Asian American community in the 2013 election? And we really wanted to bring this panel together to talk about it because of the many hats they wear professionally and personally. I know we didn't talk about order, but maybe would it be all right if, Wayne, we start with you?
Sure.
Okay, wonderful. And we'll work our way down.
What was the question again?
What is at stake for the APA community?
Wayne it's actually Ho. The title of the plenary is a question. I thought there would be more targeted questions. Good afternoon. Thanks. I know we have the unenviable task of following the commissioner as well as speaking to everybody right after lunch. So, but we will, this is a great panel of people that I'm honored to be part of, so we will keep this engaging. So what's at stake? I think we all know what's at stake. Everybody here is interested not only in community development or the Asian American community, but making sure that New York City is better. So I think it's an opportunity for us to reflect back on what's happened under the Bloomberg administration, but for us to move forward about what do we want to see under the next mayoral administration for New Yorkers of Asian descent. So under 12 years of leadership under the current administration, you can think about it as kids have started in the New York City public school district system and have graduated, are going to be graduating this year. That's their entire 1st through 12th grade experience here in New York City. Think about where the city budget was at. When the mayor took over, the city budget was in the low 50s. It was about $53, $52 billion a year. His preliminary budget this year is about $70 billion. So that's a huge increase in the budget in terms of services, education, as well as government administration. We should think about how many governors he's had under his term, how many city council leaders we've had under his term. But I think more importantly for us, we should think about what's at stake for the Asian American community in our growth. So when we talk to Asian American community members, I think we all know that there's similar concerns that we have. Better schools, good jobs, good homes, healthy and safe neighborhoods, healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. We all know that. But I think the challenge comes that we don't, to what extent are Asian Americans meaningfully included when the mayoral administration is making policy decisions? Do they stop at any point to really consider how Asian Americans be affected if we pass this law? So we hear a lot of times about graduation rates are not good in Black and Latino communities. So the mayor a couple years ago started the Young Men's Initiative, or the Young Men of Color Initiative. Do they target Asian Americans in that initiative? No. When the mayor puts forward his policies on education reform, and we get those emails, 3 or 4 emails a week around what's going on in New York City public schools, how many times do we see a mention of Asian American students? It's 0, or they'll talk about how we're succeeding. So it perpetuates a model minority myth. So we're going to get plenty of more questions and I want to hear from the audience too and hear from my co-panelists. But I think all I would put out there is that the strategies that we need to use as a community to empower ourselves should not just be based on a deficiency perspective of this is what we need because we have high immigrant populations, we have high overcrowding in housing, we have high rates of domestic violence, et cetera. But I think we need to leverage our strength as a community. So how are we the fastest growing voter population? How are we engaging with candidates through donations? How can we mobilize the community in order to go out and volunteer for campaigns? How do we as a community come together to register voters and turn out voters at the polls? And once before we decide who the mayor is and during the transition of the new mayor, how are we as Asian Americans engaging with campaign teams? How are we on transition teams? And are we going to get appointed to leadership roles under the new administration? None of these strategies are rocket science because other communities use them, but what are we as an Asian American community going to do to fundamentally shift policies and systems so that there's meaningful inclusion of our diverse community under the next mayoral administration? Thanks.
Thanks, Wayne. I think you really were helpful in laying out the bigger pictures that we want to dive deeper into in the panel and also at the audience participation part closer to the end. Maria, I know you have a really important role to play in terms of your work at SEIU 1199. I would like to talk about really what's at stake in the upcoming elections.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored that I was asked to speak today in what is at stake in the Asian community in the 2013 local elections. Asian Americans make up a vital part in New York City's population, and it's crucial that we address our community needs in the changing political landscape. 1199 SEIU represent 220,000 healthcare and social service workers throughout New York City, and 350,000 members from Massachusetts to Florida. Our members work for hospitals, nursing homes, home care agency, and community-based organizations. Approximately 10% of our members are Asian Americans. They include nurses, pharmacists, therapists, thousands of home care workers serving primarily Mandarin and Cantonese-speaking clients. Overall, New York healthcare and social assistance industries employ the most Asian workers of any sector in New York City. It is important to point out that more and more healthcare industry relies on Asian caregivers to provide culturally competent care to an increasingly diverse population, including fluency in medical terminology. But despite of the fact that so many Asian Americans are caring for our sick and elderly, our city is not adequately addressing our community's healthcare needs. 21% of Asian American adults in New York are uninsured. This is the second highest rate among New York ethnic group. 22% of Asian American adults don't have regular healthcare providers, and 19% have not sought medical care because of concerns about cost in healthcare. Asian American seniors are more than 2 times as likely not to have coverage as other ethnic groups. This has to change. We need to take full advantage of the Affordable Care Act, the Obamacare. Over 100,000 Asian Americans statewide are expected to gain from health insurance because of Obamacare, and need to ensure that outreach and enrollment efforts reach deep into our communities. That is the responsibility of city officials, community groups, healthcare providers, and insurers. Our union will be playing an active role in this effort. We must coordinate our efforts as much as possible to avoid duplication and confusion. For example, we should encourage the use of same characters in Chinese and other character-based language to refer to key Affordable Care Act concepts across various materials. At the same time, we need to make sure that the next mayor preserves the safety net hospitals that we depend on. Right now, community hospitals are facing growing challenges from federal and state budget cuts, as well as huge challenges in models of changing healthcare financing. Over the long term, some institutions may be reduced to community-based primary care. Over the short term, we are in serious danger of losing vital healthcare resources, particularly in Brooklyn. Long-term care is also undergoing tremendous changes with the move to managed care. State laws and policies have preserved community of care between seniors and their homes, home care aides during the transition of home care services, but they must remain vigilant to avoid disruption. For an example, new state rules required home care training programs to use published textbooks. That's well and good, but it turned out that the published textbooks in languages are only in English and Spanish, causing more programs to halt their training program in Chinese and Korean. Through the efforts of our union, advocates, home care agencies, we were able to get the state to allow for translation of existing materials and find funding through the city council to do so. Another need is training. In the healthcare industry, there can be a disconnect between jobs available and the skills of the workforce. Current healthcare workers can move into higher paying jobs like laboratory technology or respiratory therapies if the right training programs are made available for them. For example, by offering classes at night and on weekends so that workers can upgrade their skills while maintaining current employment. Despite challenges, this is an exciting time for New York City's Asian American workforce, and we are happy to work with new political leaders to bring about positive change. A new movement of low-wage workers, including home care workers, is demanding fair treatment, better regulation, and higher wages. New York City should create a mayor's office for labor standards to help advance these efforts. As we elect new leaders, it is crucial that we make sure that taxpayers don't subsidize bad jobs through the setting and enforcing of poor work standards in the name of economic development. Overall, we look forward to continuing to work with Asian elected leaders and community allies for our progressive vision for Asians and all working New Yorkers, including good jobs, civil and immigrant rights, and access to health care for all. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I kind of wear two hats. One is, as Douglas has said, many years in government, city, state, and federal, 3 mayors, 2 Cuomos. Probably an answer to a trivia question somewhere out there. But I've been very active many years ago in the Asian American community. Some old faces I see here, Suki, who remember me when my days at AAFE as president in the 80s and 90s. Some of you weren't even born back then, probably. And so I want to look at it from 2 perspectives. One is sort of from a public policy perspective, and one is from a political perspective. There's an old saying that good politics isn't always good policy, and good policy isn't always good politics. And I think that's really true this year for the Asian community, for the mayoral candidates, and for the next mayor, whoever he or she may be. Because there will be a finite amount of money available to him or her to make some difficult choices of where to invest that money. So it's going to be very challenging to just push issues that are specific to one community. I think the challenge for the Asian community is to figure out issues that resonate in our community that resonate in other communities. So you can build coalitions, because the candidate that will win is the one that gets the biggest coalition of voters. And before I get into the 3 issues that I think offer the bridge building opportunities that I'm talking about, I want to just make some observations about this election. We're in uncharted territory. In trying to Google previous elections, I think they'll be writing about this election years from now. There are 4 things that I think are unique about this election that will make the outcome so uncertain. The first is, I cannot remember in recent memory having such a competitive race in both the Democratic and Republican primaries. We have 6 Democratic candidates, maybe 7, waiting for Anthony Weiner. And you would have to go back to 1977. How many people were around in 1977? Okay. I was around in 77. But I went to Wikipedia because I didn't follow the election back then. And you had 7 candidates running for mayor then. You had Ed Koch, a congressman from the east side. You had Bella Abzug, a congresswoman from the west side. You had Mario Cuomo, Secretary of State. You had the African-American borough president of Manhattan, Percy Sutton. You had the Puerto Rican borough president of the Bronx, Herman Badillo. You had the incumbent mayor, Abe Beame, and you had some guy I never heard of, Tom Harnett. And the turnout in the election was 910,000 voters. And the top 2 finishers were Koch and Cuomo with 19% and 18% of the vote, respectively. But if you looked at the vote tally of the Latino, Herman Badillo and Percy Sutton, combined, they had 26% of the vote. So had they built a coalition, had one not run and support the other, it's possible that either a Latino or African American would have been in the runoff against either Koch or Cuomo. So coalition building is important. So I think the competitive nature of this election will make it historic, because you have 6 candidates, 4 of them have credible political bases which they could make into the runoff. The second unprecedented event is that this primary, and probably this general election, will be the first time that people of color will make up the majority of the electorate. Unheard of. Third factor that I think is unprecedented is and you read it every single day in the newspaper, which elected official has been arrested. And unfortunately, it's mostly people of color. I mean, there have been a few white elected officials, Alan Hevesy, the former state controller, Brian McLaughlin, the assemblyman in Queens, and Anthony Simeo, Bruno. There have been a few, but increasingly the numbers are people of color, of all races, African American, Asian, Latino. Part of this, I think, is the fact that, for better or for worse, people of color have achieved political power, and the risk of political power is corruption. And so what impact this will have on the election is uncertain to me. Whether this will energize minority voters, whether this will deflate turnout, will have no impact. That's a question we'll know on September 11th. And then the fourth factor that I think will shape the outcome of the election is the dysfunctionality of the Board of Elections. Yesterday, they testified before the City Council, and they said, quote unquote, it's a disaster waiting to happen. Because this election, they will not only have a primary on September 10th, they will have a likely runoff 2 weeks later on the 24th, and then the general election. And for people who voted last year in the presidential election, I'm sure you all had a pleasant experience voting. I did. I waited an hour and a half to vote. And so there's uncertainty as to whether the Board of Election can certify the outcome of a primary on September 10th and have its act together to run a runoff 2 weeks later. So all those factors, I think, will lead to an unprecedented event. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, I won't say. But I think what it says to the Asian community is that everything is up for grabs if you can build a coalition around the right issues. So the three issues that I think resonate in our community and also resonate in other communities where you can build coalitions around, and I'll touch on them briefly and then we can talk about them. One is education. It's the #1 issue. It's a big issue, I know, in the Asian community. Parents are very committed to education. And I think the next mayor is going to have to decide what the right balance is about what role should high-stakes testing play in the educational system. You want accountability, but how do you make sure that you don't go overboard? I mean, there's this recent scandal with the gifted and talented testing where they keep on changing the scores. I mean, that's a great example that I think the next mayor needs to figure out how to balance those two things. The issue of parent engagement, another big issue that's been left unresolved. The second issue, which I'll talk about, and I'm sure you'll talk more about, is the lack of affordable housing. I mean, it's no accident that you see Asians moving in all kinds of neighborhoods. Why there are Chinese people living in East Harlem now, because there's no affordable housing left in Chinatown. Chinatown's getting gentrified, and so you saw the Times story a few months ago. They migrate along the 6th line up to public housing in East Harlem. When I worked with AAFE in the 80s and 90s and we were fighting gentrification, we were able to, I think, delay it, but not stop it. And there was a Wall Street Journal article not too long ago which they started talking about parts of Chinatown being renamed Chumbo, right? It's Chumbo, Chinatown under the Manhattan Bridge overpass or something like that. It's scary. When they start coming up with names for your neighborhood, you know that it's the real estate people are marketing it. So I think, and you see it every single day. I mean, I was telling the Commissioner of Towns that in the 10 years I've lived in Forest Hills, I can see that people are being pushed further and further out of the circle. I mean, people have to either go further out to Queens or Brooklyn to find affordable housing. When I used to get off at Forest Hills on the Continental Avenue 10 years ago, the train was half empty. Now it's still packed and people are moving out to Jamaica because they cannot find affordable housing. That's an issue that cuts across every ethnic community in the city. And the last issue, I know it's an issue that I know Wayne has raised a lot, is the issue of cultural competency. Because increasingly the city of New York doesn't deliver social services directly. It contracts out. So the challenge is how do you do it in a way that meets the diverse needs of the city? Increasingly, communities are not longer one ethnic group. You have multi-ethnic groups living in one community. So in East Harlem, you have Mexicans, you have Chinese, and you have the old Puerto Rican community and remnants of an Italian community. In East New York, you have a growing Bangladeshi community. So as the city awards contracts to provide services, whether it's for aging services, youth services, it has to ensure that the groups that get this money are culturally competent and can meet the needs of the diverse neighborhoods they serve. And I'll end there and just want to hear the back and forth, but thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to talk about the issues coming up with housing in the Asian community in the next period. So I'm Benjamin Dolch. I'm the executive director of the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development, and we are the coalition of 94 neighborhood-based affordable housing groups across the city. So organizations that either build, manage, or do neighborhood-based grassroots advocacy around affordable housing issues. We're very proud that AAFE and a number of other organizations with Asian bases are some of our strong core members, but for a number of years since ANHD was formed in 1974, our groups have not just been the ones on the ground that have been building and managing affordable housing, but have been creating the social movement around affordable housing that defines the policy landscape and keeps affordable housing really present on the present in the political agenda. A lot of that's due to our ability to work and coordinate with groups like AAFE, like Chaya and Ming Kwan and others. So I'm going to just talk for a couple minutes about what's at stake in the 2013 elections around housing and the Asian community. So, so I did a kind of a whole bunch of sort of statistical and demographic research, preparing my remarks. But I know that you guys spent a lot of time this morning talking about that. So let me just sort of summarize that by saying that the Asian community faces all the same problems in the housing arena that the New York City community faces, only more so. So sort of breaking it up into all the different demographic categories within Asian, they tend to be more overcrowded, more affected, and have more of an affordability crunch than the average New Yorker. So everything we know about New York City, which is that there is not enough affordable housing, there isn't enough housing, and that it is very difficult for people to spend a reasonable amount of their income and to remain stable in their neighborhoods, that all the facets of the Asian community face those same those same concerns, only more so. So when I speak about housing, I'm going to talk about it kind of broadly in kind of a citywide context, but clearly it's something which is of particular concern to immigrant communities and to Asian communities. So what is 2013 is going to be our first opportunity in what seems like forever to change housing policy in New York City. It has been, 3 long terms of the Bloomberg administration, 12 years of housing policy set by one person. And there has been good and there has been bad there. I think the broad thing I would say about Bloomberg, I think this has sort of been forgotten. There was an extraordinary fiscal crisis in the first couple of years of the Bloomberg administration. And in the second year of his mayoralty, and I am no fan of Bloomberg, but in the second year of his mayoralty, there was sort of a decisive moment where in the midst of a fiscal crisis, Bloomberg could either take the road of cutting back on municipal services and sort of cutting the budget and kind of reducing the way New York City served its population, or he could sort of raise taxes and choose to reinvest in the public sphere and say what's going to make New York City succeed is a city that is livable and sustainable and where people want to come because we together invest in the infrastructure and these common collective spaces that we have, and we're going to build New York City by growing, not by cutting the budget. And it is forgotten, but it is very notable that in that second year of his mayoralty, Republican Mayor Bloomberg chose to raise taxes in the face of Republican orthodoxy around the country. And that was kind of, I think, kind of the critical moment, right? If we think of Bloomberg as kind of the representative of sort of the enlightened business class. They want this city to work, and they would like it to be okay for people, but they want it to work based on kind of the growth of, its wealthier residents. So it could have been worse. We could have had a Republican in the in City Hall who was looking to kind of to cut back on budgets and really sort of disinvesting from city infrastructure and services. I think we're lucky that we didn't. But that being said, what he did in housing has a very mixed legacy, and I think that kind of informs what the remarkable opportunities that we have are. First, let me sort of say kind of one kind of critical thing and then set it aside. The most important affordable housing program in New York City is rent regulation, right? Most affordable housing in New York City is in those gray rent-stabilized, rent-controlled buildings in Upper Manhattan and the outer boroughs that were built by the private market and are sustained by the private market and are protected by rent regulation. This is not something that is in the mayor's direct hands. This is controlled by Albany because of something called the Erstat law, in which Albany has taken unto themselves the sole power to strengthen rent regulation. But the most important affordable housing program in New York City is rent regulation. It is also the most cost-effective affordable housing program in New York City. It is unimaginable. It is 100 times more cost-effective to preserve the existing housing you have than to build new affordable housing. And my member organizations build new affordable housing, and we like to do that. But boy, it's better to preserve what you got. So the New York City mayor does not have direct control over rent regulation. However, they have a very important bully pulpit. And it is a bully pulpit that Mayor Bloomberg has not used. Mayor Bloomberg, although he has done some very good things in affordable housing, he has fundamentally, ideologically been suspicious of rent regulation, believing that it interferes in the proper operations of the private market, not recognizing the fact that when you have a vacancy rate that's around 2%, the free market in housing really doesn't function effectively. And so it needs to be, kind of modified by rent regulation. He has not used his bully pulpit to protect rent regulation. He has allowed Albany year after year to slice away at tenant protections. We are losing about 10,000 units of rent-stabilized housing every year because of the loopholes in rent regulation. The next mayor, and really the most important affordable housing thing the next mayor can do, is to use their bully pulpit to strongly and loudly demand that rent-stabilized housing be protected and that the loopholes be closed, because there is no better way to keep our neighborhoods affordable and stable. But I'm going to put that aside because that's not something which the mayor can directly do, although their bully pulpit really does matter, and that is something we have to demand. So there are two really critical things that Mayor Bloomberg has done for affordable housing. So one is the new housing marketplace plan, where really as a result of community organizing, right, as a result of organizing that happened before the Bloomberg elections, there was kind of a big push from organized groups and a big media campaign to push for affordable housing to be a centerpiece of any mayoral administration. Mayor Bloomberg embraced this, I think recognizing that you needed to have sort of a diversity of workers, and he believes in immigrant New York, right? He understands that you need to have affordable housing in order to grow and sustain immigrant New York. And so he hired a very good housing commissioner and created this thing called the New Housing Marketplace Plan, which is on track to, by the end of 2015, I think, to build some 165,000 units of affordable housing. It is a genuinely remarkable achievement. And the fact that it was sustained even during times of economic downturn, when there was, any number of excuses to turn away from building affordable housing, we built affordable housing. And that really means something. And so there was in many neighborhoods kind of a good, stable core of affordable housing that was built. The next mayor will also have an opportunity to build affordable housing, and their challenge, and I think what we really need to demand, is that that housing be structured in the most effective way to actually stabilize the neighborhoods in which it was built. So one of the major flaws of the New Housing Marketplace Plan is that, and this is according to a recent ANHD study looking into the details of what was built, that 2/3 of the housing that was built was not affordable to a family earning 50% or below of the median income in which it was built. So the affordable housing that's being built with public subsidy, with taxpayer dollars, even though it is below market rate, is not genuinely affordable, is not genuinely stabilizing of the neighborhoods in which it was built. And this is a holdover from the fact that when many of the great New York City affordable housing programs were developed under, under Koch and then continued under Dinkins, really they thought of affordable housing as economic development, right? Doing anything to bring in kind of people and stabilize neighborhoods and bring in more income diversity in certain neighborhoods. New York City isn't at that point anymore. The threat to New York City neighborhoods isn't disinvestment. The threat to New York City neighborhoods is overinvestment. What we really need to do with our affordable housing policy is to stabilize the neighborhoods and allow people not to be pushed out by an ever-hot market. And to do that in the affordable housing that's built, you need to make sure that what you're building is what we're calling contextually affordable. That you're structuring the AMIs, you're structuring the income levels of the housing that's being built to actually meet the genuine income needs of that local neighborhood so that the housing is having the effect of stabilizing the local community and not, unfortunately, destabilizing the local community. This is a critical thing the next mayor can do, and something which is going to be extraordinarily important to kind of all the neighborhoods across the city that need affordable housing. The second sort of thing that we've seen, as sort of the impact of the Bloomberg housing legacy, of course, is rezonings. Mayor Bloomberg has, at a pace we have, not seen really since Robert Moses' days, has rezoned broad swaths of New York City, sort of with the, the model that each piece of land in New York City should find its highest and best use. And in many neighborhoods of New York City, particularly along the waterfronts, he has seen that as being luxury development and kind of festive uses. And for relaxation, bicycles, waterfront access, all good stuff. But there has been a really sort of a tragic lost opportunity to create the affordable housing that our communities need out of these rezonings. So I think everyone here in this room remembers that in 2005, there was a big community campaign that won voluntary inclusionary zoning, right? Saying, when New York City rezones neighborhoods around, when New York City government rezones, at the stroke of a pen, the value of the land is increased tenfold, right? So if you're a landlord in the 4th Avenue corridor of Brooklyn and that is suddenly rezoned, you can, instead of being able to build this high and this dense, you can build this high and this dense. At the stroke of a pen, the value of your property is being increased tenfold. And communities fought back and said, if you're going to upzone certain neighborhoods and allow more housing to be built, that may well be what a growing New York City population needs. But given that the developer is going to be making so much money off of this, there should be affordable housing that is created as kind of as a give back to the community to make sure that there is something of value really created with the local neighborhood. Against his strong opposition, Bloomberg was forced to accept a voluntary inclusionary zoning, which said that with a little additional benefit to the developer, they can build, they can get an additional density bump, and in return for that, they can opt in to building some amount of affordable housing. That was unfortunately one of the most important affordable housing programs potentially, and unfortunately has been one of the greatest failures of this administration. Voluntary inclusionary zoning has not worked. There have been 100,000 units of new housing created through all of the Bloomberg zonings since 2003. Less than 2,000 of those were affordable under the voluntary inclusionary zoning program. So only less than 2% of the housing that was built was actually affordable. That is not just a public policy failure of voluntary inclusionary zoning. It is an incredible missed opportunity for New York City residents, because the truth is that there is less city-owned land to build on. What we sort of think of as the great affordable housing programs really relied on vacant city-owned land controlled by HPD. There is still a fair amount of city-owned land to build on. There will be much more affordable housing built with city-controlled property, but there's a lot less than there used to be. And if the next mayor is going to have a meaningful impact on affordable housing, they're not going to do it simply by building on HPD-owned land. They're going to have to genuinely, right, and I sort of hate to use this phrase, they are going to need to leverage the power of the private market. They're going to need to build off budget. They're going to need to find ways in which the city can use its regulatory power to make sure that the private market, as it builds new affordable housing, is going to build housing that doesn't just build luxury, but really builds the housing that local communities need. Although voluntary inclusionary zoning was an important victory back in 2005, it really changed the paradigm of the way city thinks about affordable housing, about zoning. It didn't work. In no uncertain terms. The next step is clearly a change to mandatory inclusionary zoning. We as a community, as people who care about affordable housing, need to push and win that when there's a rezoning, that if the developer chooses to build, right, take advantage of that rezoning, right, if they choose to build and use that new FAR, that they are required to build some percentage of affordable housing. Otherwise, we are simply squandering our opportunity to sort of leverage the power of the private market to build affordable housing. The other really critical private market piece is something that a lot of folks in this room have spoken about, and that's accessory dwelling units, right? I think it was really folks in this room who sort of took the lead on that. Recent studies that folks have done, there are some, what is the number, 114,000 units of non-legal kind of basement or accessory dwelling unit housing along in New York City. These are some of the most important affordable housing resources in immigrant communities, and they are illegal, and because they are illegal, they are often subject to great exploitation. We all care about about health and zoning codes, but the people who've done the policy work on this estimate that some 35% of these units could be legalized, taking into account reasonable health and safety codes, could be legalized to create safer, more stable, kind of above ground housing. This is going to be important for affordable housing, sort of for all communities, but particularly in immigrant communities. It is a tricky balance. But it will take a mayor with some vision to recognize the communities that are most affected by this, and to take a bold step and to figure out what's the balance of affordable housing interest and kind of good safe zoning. So in summary, it's been 12 long years of the same housing policy. We have a chance for a new housing policy now, and we absolutely have to have a mayor who builds not just for the wealthier half of New Yorkers, but is building and is leveraging the private market in a way which helps to stabilize and create affordable housing for immigrant communities and for New York City working class neighborhoods that most need it. And we have the opportunity, but we're only going to be able to take advantage of it if sort of we as a movement and the folks in the room make it happen. And this is our chance.
Thank you, Wayne, Maria, Bill, and Benjamin. Before we open up to questions, I just want to share some of my reflections. Listening to you each speak your words. This morning at the morning plenary, coalition building came up again and again from a number of the speakers. And I think also a really important takeaway around this importance of coalition building is not doing it at the expense or in competition with other communities, our neighbors, our friends, our family members, who may not be Asian American but share many of the same needs that our communities have. I think Bill brought up a really good point related to that there are really core issues that we can all work towards, and that we as a city can all rally around, not just as individual neighborhoods or individual communities. But a reflection too, particularly talking to the points that Wayne and Maria rose, when we think about elections are elections, right? They're this big public process. Many of us who are advocates in our professional lives engage with stakeholders, try to get the word out, try to educate our communities. But when we think about our family members, we think about community members we work with every day, low-wage workers, of whom Asian Americans are really more and more of a growing representation. Or that high school student who will be graduating this June and has lived under the current administration's education policies. How do we lift them up into the process, I wonder? How do we, or is it important? Maybe not everyone might value that process specifically. And how do we make sure that the experiences of our community members and ourselves are really part of decision making moving forward, whether that be around specific policy or administrative issues. So with that, I want to open it up to the floor as well. I have a couple questions, but would love to hear from the audience. There are 2 microphones in the center aisles, one towards the front, one towards the back. If anyone has any questions, comments, we'd really welcome your participation. Any questions in the audience? No? Okay.
They're all convinced already.
I know. We're all of a similar mind in here. So, one of the reasons why we're focusing on the elections of 2013 is because for the first time in 12 years, we will have a new mayor. A number of other citywide offices, including comptroller and public advocate, are also up for election. But I think maybe most strategically or importantly, the city council will change drastically. Correct me if I'm wrong, folks at the panel. I think about 26 of the 51 council members will be leaving office. Some folks have said that this is an opportunity to really organize, lift up candidates who really speak to the neighborhoods they represent. Some others have said that this could be a good opportunity for an even more progressive council than in the current council. What do you all think? When we think about the political landscape, what's really up for grabs and how should our community tap into that?
Well, let me again point to another election that I think was a turning point in the city, which was 1989 when Mayor Dinkins was elected, the first African American for the city. And the last, ironically, a Democrat was elected in this city. It was 24 years ago. So I think there were 2 things that came out of that election, because I served in the Dinkins administration. One was coalition building, that Mayor Dinkins talked about the gorgeous mosaic, but he also had there was unprecedented turnout in the African American community that put him over the top. I mean, that election had over 1 million, that primary had over 1 million voters. 1 million voters. You know how many people voted last time in 2009? Take a guess. 300,000. So turnout matters. And that's where the grassroots organizing does. I mean, so it's not an either or. You do coalition building or grassroots organizing. You have to do both to succeed and to have an impact in the political world. And I think the Asian community is still, in some ways, growing in this area. We're still not always part of the discussion in coalition building, and that's why I think it's important that Asians fight to be heard. And that's why it's great that Wayne is having these forums and the Asian Federation is having these forums, because everyone else is doing their forums. I mean, every single day there's a forum that a mayoral I feel sorry for these mayoral candidates. They must go to 3 or 4 of these events a day, an evening, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but I think it's the only way we can make sure that we're part of the discussion, because if we don't advocate for ourselves, no one else will. The question is, advocate around issues that resonate with other communities. Because if we're out there on our own advocating for issues that might be important to us but not important to anyone else, no one's going to listen to us. That's just the political reality. Because they're about getting votes, we're getting the majority of votes, and whoever can get the majority of vote to get in the runoff, and the majority of votes to win the runoff, and the majority of votes to win the general election is the person that will succeed, and the person who will, and to govern successfully, you need to. I mean, the mayor just announced today that 25% of the budget is in what's called legacy costs, fixed costs, pension, healthcare costs, debt service. So that means whoever the next mayor is, they're not going to have a whole lot of money to play around with unless they increase taxes, which is what Mayor Bloomberg did in his second year. And he raised property taxes. His approval ratings dropped into the 30s. And everyone thought at that time, ironically, that he was a one-term mayor. But the economy turned around. He wisely spent that money from the property tax increase and continued to govern. So I think coalition building and grassroots organizing have to go hand in hand.
Yeah. I mean, I think every office is basically up for grabs this coming election. And I think that's why it was so significant when Mayor Bloomberg got his third term, because it had this domino effect for all the two other citywide offices, state offices, borough presidents, city council members who had other plans. It just had this domino effect across the board about the next administration that would come in and who would assume leadership. So city council is important, but there's 51 of them and one speaker, and there's certain chairs and certain leadership in the city council that's more important than others. We're talking about the bully pulpit. What is the real role of the comptroller and the public advocate and the borough president? There's some elected officials or community members who are trying to eliminate certain ones of these offices. But getting allies that we helped elect to get in those positions is helpful for our community, because whether they have authority or whether they have a bully pulpit, it will help our community push things forward. So I think it's important for us, in terms of talking about strategy, is what are we doing now to engage with these folks who are running for office? Not just the mayoral candidates, but what are we doing with those who are running for comptroller? It's only one at this point with Scott Stringer. What are we doing for the public advocate? There's a series of them. What are we doing for the lead city council who are running for re-election? The borough presidents, because a lot of them are positioning themselves now to become borough presidents. So keep in mind that there's things that we can do now before they're elected. We can assume certain ones will win, but what are we doing now in coalition, not just with other communities of color, but what are we doing as a coalition as an Asian community? It's not just Chinese, it's not just Korean, it's not just Indian, is that what are we doing as a pan-Asian community so that we have a common agenda that we're pushing forward? And then what are we doing strategically to engage with these folks? There's 6 city council members who are interested in becoming speaker. Do we all know who the 6 are? Do we know who's more likely to become speaker? The 5 who don't become speaker, guess what they get though? Pretty prime chair positions or leadership positions in the city council. So maybe we should be engaging with the 6 now. Are we engaging with all the candidates who are running for borough president? Those who are running for citywide offices. And when I say engagement, it's not just talking about policy, but we have to keep in mind, without being corrupt, how that there is a level of engagement with them. So how many of us have donated to a campaign this season? I'm not going to ask you who. How many of you have donated to a campaign this season? How many of you have co-hosted or helped with a fundraiser for a campaign this season? How many of you did it for anybody other than John Liu? Okay, that's good. By the way, I'm not against John Liu, to be really clear. I'm putting it out there. We all know John, right? In terms of, that's who paved the way for our community, right? So a lot of us are working with John's office and John's team. But I think it's important for us to really think about how are we strategically engaging with these folks. Raising a few $1,000s at a house party for a city council member is actually a lot of money for a city council election.
6-to-1 match.
Yep. 6-to-1 match. I mean, how many emails did you get that there's the Saturday deadline that just passed, right? I think like Reshma Sajani's entire family emailed me from 8 a.m. in the morning until 11 p.m. at night on Saturday. That's all. I don't know how they all got my email address. But I think the point of it is that we as a community need to become more sophisticated, more collaborative, more solidified, and also more strategic in how are we engaging with candidates now, because everybody else is doing it, so that if and when they take office, we come in on the front side and not the back end as a community.
I represent the Healthcare Workers Union, and we all know that this is a very critical moment in our city's history, the opportunity to elect a mayor and elect city council that will really represent our communities. And in our union, we invited all the mayoral election to our executive committee and interviewed them. It's like coming to a job interview. We asked questions on what's their vision for New York, because we, as healthcare workers, we have a vision for New York. And we also asked the question of what's their winning, aside from the vision, what's their winning strategy? And most of them, through all the years, we have relationship because they are all with us when we have struggles to improve working lives of our members. So they're not new to us, but at the same time, through all the history of working with them, we know what are their strengths and the areas that we want them to be more strengthened in their positions. So that's one. Second, I know in some of the city council, we encourage our rank and file leaders to do some interviews so that they're coming for a job interview. And we want to make sure that when they're soliciting our support, that we are clear on what we are looking for as elected leaders. Our union is also talking to other labor leaders to get their ideas, what's their vision, what are the criteria of what they do, part of coalition building. So that, as we say, instead of dividing our strength, if we can unite on some candidates that we feel are really good, then that's our goal.
Okay. Thank you all. I'm going to call out again. Any questions from the audience? Yes, can you please come to a mic and introduce yourself?
Thank you. Is this on?
Try it. Maybe there's a...
Speak into it.
Yeah.
Okay. My question is, you all seem very knowledgeable about the political process, but it's been my experience that a lot of my friends, and I guess the young people, are not really interested in politics. They find it rather tainted, and it's just not something that they would be interested in going into. So unless we get over that hurdle, I really don't see a lot of progress. So can you speak about that?
I think, let me talk about sort of like my own experiences. And I got started with community organizations, and maybe that's the way to go, because electoral politics does have, I think, a certain stigma, especially now with all these people getting arrested, quite frankly. But the path I took was the path I think many people took, was in the sort of activist days in the civil rights movement in the 60s and 70s. Many of us got made more aware of the power of organizing. And so that's what I gravitated to and I became active with AAFE in 1981. But I realized that there's a limit to just being a community organizer. And President Obama was a community organizer. So, I mean, great example of sometimes. So I wouldn't just say people should get involved in politics. I think people should get involved in their communities, because through that, you understand that you need to infect the political process. That there's just one strategy that sometimes you need to picket, and sometimes you need to vote, and sometimes you need to do something else. And so it's one tool in the toolkit to make positive changes in our communities. Because the worst thing to do is just become a political person who just works on campaigns. And there are some people who do that for a living, and more power to them. But I think it's important to be grounded in community activism and issues that resonate with you, and through that you can get involved in campaigns for either city council or state office or whatever.
I think that's right. And I mean, one of the great changes in New York City has been term limits in the last number of years, although it has been less limited recently. But term limits has been extraordinarily important for allowing kind of new blood to come up, particularly through city council elections. I mean, it used to be that city council members were there kind of, for life or until indictment.
Or death.
Or death. We've seen kind of a fruition of new political interest and networks grow up through kind of this genuine excitement that there is an opportunity to bring up new council members who can represent kind of new and vibrant forces within the neighborhood, and that has been important, and that will be an ongoing thing once term limits kind of comes back to the way it's supposed to be. But that being said, I think for a lot of people, myself included, I don't find politics itself that interesting. I find social change and organizing to kind of make a difference in issues interesting. And so there is, in tens of communities across the city, there are very vibrant community and grassroots organizing networks that are working to, achieve policy victories and change on issues. New York City has a very, very effective network of local neighborhood groups, and that comes from the fact that there are thousands and thousands of people who are engaged in what they see as the critical issues in their buildings, in their streets, in their communities, and then are able to make the connections to think about what the citywide policy implications are and to channel that effectively. And that's probably the most important thing people can do, because that means that whoever's elected, you've got the networks to hold them accountable to your issues. So.
Other questions from the audience?
David Chen. I know Bill since she had a full head of hair.
Yes.
And I was continuing to be amazed why, as he receded his hairline, he's getting more vitamin D, he's getting wiser by the day. But also know Wayne Ho cut his hair short. It wasn't receded. So he's still wise.
How many nights?
But I really want to address the first question.
I have hair, David. I just choose to keep it short.
I still have full head of hair. I still try to get wiser. So, I want to respond to the first question asked, why are young people not involved? I guess if we go back to old slogan that we had when we were organizing one days, it's called organized as unorganized, right? You talk about us who have been organizing a movement on different things and get involved, and over the years, from organizer, we become planner, administrators. We're organizing of thoughts, we talk about wisdom, but somehow we are converting the converted. Somehow we gotta activate the converted and also organize this as organized. Somewhere along the line, it is organizing. When you talk about big strategy, which we are getting wiser, but somehow we must not lose touch on continually working with young people. I'm amazed to see how many new faces I've seen here. I used to come here and see a lot of old faces, but I really see a lot of new faces. But I got a little disappointed when I hear, which I suspected was, they're not involved in politics because they think politics is not professional. It's wheels and deal, the corruption part that was mentioned. Well, but if you don't change them, they will continue to be corrupted. So I guess there's no way, if we want to move ahead, we must reflect on those good, bad, and ugly, and continue to organize and convert, activate, not talking the same pool of people who are like-minded already, but if you don't get off, pardon my language, if you don't get off your butt, nothing's going to change. So in that sense, again, from organizer, I'm become administrator now, right? But you really have to really understand the part that administrator and older people sitting on the panel. I remember when I was younger and organized, we just frustrated people on the panel don't seem to understand us. Now it seems like people on the panel talk like us, but somehow it's the people in the audience may not follow up with the wisdom. So I think it's really important to see the part that we have older, wiser people up there willing to do changes with us. It's important for the younger generation to really continue that struggle and making sure we're hooked up and collaborate in that sense. Thank you.
I just want to give an example of like expanding on community organizing and how you can have power. You talked about inclusionary zoning. Back in 1981, the city was trying to rezone part of Chinatown, and they were going to build luxury high-rises off of East Broadway near the Manhattan Bridge, called the Special Manhattan Bridge District. Chris Coy will remember this. Jackie, you will remember this. And it was a big, big fight. And all of us, we were much, much younger back then, in our 20s. And so we fought. The city council, the city had already passed the zoning. We got wind of it after the fact. And we organized protests. We took over community board meetings. We sued the city. We went all the way to Albany, and we stopped the zoning. And what saved Chinatown back then was the housing market collapsed. And the zoning had a 10-year sunset, so we stopped it from 81 to 91, and the real estate market collapsed. And then I think we preserved Chinatown from getting gentrified for a good 15, 20 years. And through that experience, I think I did, and many of us at AAFE at the time learned about the importance of also engaging in the political process, that you couldn't just do the community organizing, but you also had to engage elected officials. And some of us went into public service in government, some of us stayed with AAFE, others did other things. So I think, don't sell short the power of community organizing, getting involved in your neighborhoods, getting involved in things that matter to you, because by working with others, you can have an impact.
Oh, just to do some organizing in this room really fast. How many of you in here are 18 and over?
Oh.
There's some of you whose hands should be up. All right, keep it wait. How many of you here are 18?
David,
how many of you in here are 18 and over? How many of you are of voting age?
How many are registered to vote?
How many of you are registered to vote? How many of you vote?
Primer.
No. How many of you voted in the last election? How many of you? Oh wait, that's a lot of people.
That's not bad. Yeah.
That's not bad, actually. Actually, give yourself a round of applause. That was pretty good. How many of you? Some of you may think back farther. How many of you, when you were 18, you registered to vote when you became 18? So what motivated you to do that?
Civic duty.
Civic duty. What else motivated you to do that?
My parents were very interested in politics, and it was just what you do.
Other folks?
Candidates spoke to something that I was interested in or had never spoke to issues that I was in. Previous candidates spoke in previous elections that I've done that.
Other folks?
Wanted to get George Bush out of office.
You the first or the second? So getting a candidate out of office that you disagree with. There's another voice here, sorry? To have an impact. Other reasons?
Because some people before us have fought too long for us to get the right to vote.
Right.
So especially as a woman, I thought it was very important for me to register and vote because it took 150 years, right, for women before me to get a right to vote.
Right. So it's historical reasons. Other reasons?
My mom wanted to organize against my dad's Republican vote.
Family love. It's offsetting votes. It works. It works. So, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why we all got involved in this work. And this is not a representative sampling of New York City because we're all at this conference. So we're all interested in this stuff. But I think there's that issue of what are we instilling in young people to make sure they get registered? Or what opportunities and are there enough resources for us to get people registered to vote? Are there enough programs to naturalize immigrants to become citizens here in New York City? Are we making sure the Board of Elections is translating materials? Are we making sure they're not asking for ID every time we show up to the polls? So there's a host of reasons why we got involved in this work, and what are we doing to instill and give those access to others to come into this line of work and to continuously vote. So I think it's always important for us, and I thank David for his comment, is that we should continuously think not just about the young people we work with or the immigrants we work with, but what are we really doing for ourselves and our families and our neighborhoods and our friends to make sure they go out and vote. And I feel like most times we're really telling our friends and family to vote the way we want them to vote, which is okay. So keep doing that.
I think Wayne is right. This room is not necessarily representative. For those of us who were here in the morning panel, Howard Chief from the Federation showed us some really interesting data in terms of civic participation in Asian community in New York City, New York State, that even though about 2/3 of Asian voting age citizens in New York State are registered to vote, less than 1/3 of them actually vote. I want to take this opportunity to plug, there's a lot of ways that folks can get involved. Next Monday, May 20th, AAFE and a coalition of dozens of organizations all over the city are organizing an APA mayoral forum at LaGuardia Community College. And actually, June 25th, Our Cities, Our Homes, which is a coalition led by the Association for Neighborhood Housing and Development, is organizing a mayoral forum around housing and economic development issues. But my question, kind of to wrap up to the panel, is that we know that forums are a way to get involved. We know that probably a lot of everyone in this room most likely has at least been to one or wanted to go to one, even if they didn't make it. And we know voting and turnout on the day of election, the primary and the general election are really critical. But what about the in-between? How do you actually engage people who are maybe apathetic, really have written off the political process? How do you get them involved? But also, how do you get folks who aren't yet eligible to be involved? This morning, Danny Drum also talked about legislation he just proposed around expanding the franchise to non-citizen New Yorkers to vote in municipal elections. What kind of opportunity does that really provide for New York, and how would that be a game changer?
Well, one thing, not necessarily in the elections per se, but one of the things that the City Council did this year is participatory budgeting, where people get a chance to vote on how to spend money in their community. I mean, this is, I think, came from Latin America, I think is where the origins of the approach is. I think 8 council members did this. Each year, a council member gets at least $1 million in what's called capital money, meaning to build stuff, whether it's to fix schools, fix libraries, to do improvements on the street. And usually it's a very closed process where the council member picks and chooses who they want to reward or punish, or whoever is a supporter or giving them money or what have you. But 8 council members, including Brad Lander from Park Slope and Melissa Mark-Viverito from East Harlem, have done it this year, and it's been incredible. They've gotten people who've historically never been involved in the process, people who are not citizens, people who might not be old enough to vote, but people who are residents in that community to vote on how money should be spent in their community. And I'm hoping that the next speaker will adopt this in all 51 council districts, because what better way to govern and be transparent and to let people have a voice in how their money is spent.
I mean, there's lots of places in this country where you can have a real bummer of a conversation, but the lack of civic participation and the lack of, sort of young people getting involved. New York City is not one of those places by and large. We have a very, very vibrant, active, and engaged civic infrastructure here that is, largely, sort of driven by, immigrant communities and communities of color. I mean, we have a city where people know how to have influence. A lot of it happens through community organizations. The fact that there is this network of sort of locally based civic organizations that are able to kind of bring people up from the community and engage them on critical policy issues. I mean, the reason that New York City is so often in the vanguard of progressive policy, not as often as we would like, and not often as in the ways we would like, but the reason it so often is because the people in this room actively make it that. And we do that pretty well. And so, look, there's 1,000 more things we need to do. And, with this, I think everybody, in this room on the panel has sort of ideas for what needs to happen and what we critically need to push the next mayor to do. But, New York City we know how to do it. Our communities know how to do it, and we do it pretty well. We just need to recommit to it. So I reject the negative tone of the conversation.
Within your right.
In our union, political involvement is one of our core strategy because we believe that healthcare funding is really tied to the state and federal government, legislative. At the same time, we know that as a union, we cannot just represent our members for their work-life issues, but most importantly, also the community issues. And so our members are engaged. One area that we engage our members is through a voluntary political action fund. Over 51% of our members voluntarily contribute $5, $10 per month for political action. And we engage our members from like the 2012 presidential election, where we went to different battleground states to campaign. We also engage in also all these different hospital closure fights, which is political. So we are always, and we do voter registration all the time, because even our members in the hospital, that workforce is really getting younger and younger, so we have to do voter registration as we sign them up for being a union member.
And I think we spent a lot of time talking about how elected officials get into office. I think it's also important for us to think about what do we do once they're in office. And I think there is an unprecedented opportunity about how many offices are opened up this time in the elections. So in addition to all the usual stuff about voting and organizing and registering people and getting out the vote the morning of for all the elections that we're going to be dealing with in the next few months, let's really think about how do we engage with the elected officials once we're there. So how do we build relationships with them? How are we putting ourselves in front of them? How are we mobilizing young people or seniors or neighborhood folks who might not be eligible to vote to get space and access in front of them? I think there are many things that Bloomberg's done well, and there's certain things that he hasn't done well for our community and other communities. But what can we do as an Asian American community to move from a lot of symbolic things that have been happening for us, whether it's Asian Heritage Month events that we show up to at Gracie Mansion, or any of the council members that have high APA populations, and they hold all these symbolic events for us, or they come to our galas, they write letters, they have I don't know how many proclamations we have because they're all in the storage at some point. But how can we move from these symbolic items, which are important because it puts us more in front of them, build relationships with them, but let's move to more substantive work. What policies are they putting forward? How's funding being allocated to our community? What are resources being allocated to our community? How are we getting leadership positions, either deputy commissioners, commissioners, appointments on commissions, appointments as deputy mayors? What can we do to make sure it's not just about getting them elected? And I think if we look at the recent history of elections in New York City, those who've won mayor or those who've won key elected races, they build a coalition across communities and groups to make sure they get elected. But the moment they're there, those coalitions fall apart, either in terms of our relationship with the elected officials or either our relationships with each other. So what can we do to maintain our coalitions across communities? And then what can we do to move to work with elected officials to continuously hold them accountable? I mean, everyone's looking for a new idea right now or innovation. I think a lot of elected officials, or most candidates, are trying to position themselves with their new ideas or how they're different from the mayor. So I think these are opportunities for us in terms of what do we want to put on their docket so that they can try and come up with new ideas in the next 4 years. But I think it's important for us in this room to continue working with each other and then to continue working with other communities once they're in office. Thanks.
Yeah. Open it up to one final question from the audience, a burning question. Yeah. So would you come up to the mic and introduce yourself? Thanks.
Hi, I'm Risa Collender, and I attend Flushing High School, and in my school, there's a large diversity regarding racial groups, but there's a disparity between, the communication between groups, and I was wondering, since you guys were talking about creating coalitions between different communities, how do you create integration between groups of color so that coalition can happen?
I mean, I talked about that a little bit, that I think you have to find common issues. I mean, I mentioned 3 that I think cut across many communities: education, affordable housing, and cultural competence. Because every neighbor, every community is concerned about their children and whether they get a proper education. And I think the record is mixed. I think there have been successes in the school system, but there's clearly new challenges. And I think young people see it every day. I think parents see it every day. Affordable housing, I think everyone knows how tough it is to live in this city. And more and more people, I think, need to work together. I mean, we tend to see these issues as somehow not affecting us, but they do affect us. And I think Wayne is right, that, it's easy to build towards the election, but sustaining the coalition after the election has always been the challenge, because that's where the real power lies. And that's how you hold people accountable. Because people can make promises when they run for office, but keeping them to their promises is always the challenge that community organizations and voters have to stand up for.
And I think there is a lot of collaboration and coalition building that does happen across communities. I think part of it is really reaching out to other communities and being willing to either more empathetic or more understanding and then more championing of their issues too. Because it's true, we do need to start with common ground and common agenda. But I mean, let's look around the room. How many non-Asians are in the room with us today? I didn't know people were going to raise their hand.
Trained response.
That was a rhetorical question that time. How many Asians are in the room? No, I'm kidding. But thank you for helping us out in racial identification today. So it's better than the census does sometimes. But I think the key is that I think what happens is we as Asians go to a lot of Asian events. But what are we doing to go to events with African American and Black populations? What are we doing with Latino events, Native American events? What are we doing with issue area events, whether it's LGBTQ populations, whether it's children's issues, seniors issues, et cetera, right? There was some number that was tossed out by a campaign person with one of the mayoral campaigns, which was since January 1st, there's been 400 invitations to mayoral forums. And I'm sure there's much more now to mayoral forums. So I think that's the key is how do we as Asians go to other communities and other events and demonstrate our support from them, but also work with them so they show support for our issues. And I think a lot of it is we need to start with individual relationships and then build it up towards organizational and community partnerships too. As a quick side note, how many of you in here happen to be a principal officer of an organization that does business with New York City? Do you know? David Chen, you're one. Chris Coy's one. C. Magnani's one. As a quick side note, if you're a principal officer of an organization, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit, that does business with New York City, there's a limit on how much donations you can give to a candidate, because then it breaks campaign finance laws. I think it's 100. I thought it was lower than that. 400. It's 400? Oh,
400, yeah.
Okay. And then some candidates have set up their own rules where it's $50, $100. But a cool technique that I've learned since I'm the principal officer of CACF is that if you cut checks to a lot of candidates, they actually have to return the check to you because they can't accept it. But you know what that did? It built good relationships with their campaign. So if you
kept your money.
But I kept my money, except for the check that I signed and mailed to those campaigns. Just something to think about for strategy if there's a concern about money because it's not tax deductible. But there are ways to build ties and also keep the cash in your pocket too. Less 46 cents per stamp. That was non sequitur to the coalition building.
Yeah, thanks for that, Wayne.
Yeah,
good info.
I got plenty of other strategies that won't cost you money.
One more question from the audience before we wrap up. Yeah, please introduce yourself.
Oh, hi, my name is Samuel Chan. I'm from Flushing High School. We are young community organizer. We see a challenge in our organization. Young people and immigrant. My parents are immigrant and they don't speak English well. As a former community organization, what advice do you have for us that face challenge when we are organization?
I would say pick a winnable battle. It's always, people want to change everything overnight, but pick something that you think you can win, and because when you win something, it builds confidence and you get more people behind you. So, the example that jumps to mind is, I was reading this story about, I was talking earlier about how the city council is using this participatory budgeting where people get a chance to vote on how to spend the capital money. So there's a group of parents and students at a school in Park Slope that they wanted $150,000 to fix their bathrooms. And they did a YouTube video and they did petitions and they got the money. And it was, you know, they got press support for it. It was a winnable victory. And then, you know, next year, who knows what people will do. So pick something that you can win and then build from there.
I would like to encourage, it's great to see the young people from the Flushing High School. I'd like to encourage you to network with your fellow high school students in other schools and find what are the issues affecting young people in our community. And I'm just saying maybe the, you know, growing high tuition fee is one area, jobs, opportunity when you graduate. So encourage you to reach out.
So I have one final closing question to the panel. Imagine that our future mayor is standing right in front of you at that mic right there. I'm really curious, because you're some of the, I think, smartest folks that we work with. What's your one hope for that person? Like, what do you want to see from the next mayor, the next administration?
Suki, what did you say?
What?
I'm sure it was good.
That's on the table. Yeah.
I would say, you know, keep the doors open to the community. Have access is so important. I mean, what Wayne says is true, is that people win the election, they forget about you until the next election. And if you have an open door to ideas, to suggestions, to issues and concerns, you know, then that's a sign of good leadership.
I mean, I guess I would say kind of listen to the community organizers, kind of that the, you know, sort of often the, you know, the people who win the elections think of community organizers and organized neighborhoods as a special interest group. You know, that's one thing that needs to be balanced against other interests. The organized communities aren't a special interest group. It's the voice of the neighborhoods, and it's the voice of people who sort of understand what are the, you know, the critical issues they're dealing with, and be open to that. And the next mayor should come to this conference next year, you know, and listen to what folks in this room have to say, and respond and have that to help set their agenda.
I would say the communities will hold you accountable to all the promises that you've been saying all the time you were campaigning, and if you don't do the job, you will be a one-time mayor.
I think she works for a union. Looking like a union person. I would encourage him or her to be bold. That I think a lot of times there are the politically expedient or easy things to do, or there's the easier communities to reach and represent. But I think it's time to be bold and come up with some big ideas, but I think big ideas that don't forget, pardon the term, the little people out there. That we need New York City to be affordable, to sustain itself, to be safe, to be economically viable, politically viable. But I think more importantly is, like, I think the communities we care about in here is not the strata that Mayor Bloomberg comes from. I think the community we care about are those who need to have equal access to those opportunities. So I hope that the next mayor is bold in what he or she does for our community and other marginalized communities.
Great. So, you know, we have more than 200 people in the room with us this afternoon. I think there are a lot of really concrete things that folks can do. Number one, glad to see that most everyone in this room is registered to vote, but it'd be great if between now and September, I guess it matters. Yes, it does matter. That everyone register 5 more people in your life who are not registered to vote, or who might be becoming new citizens in the next couple of months. It's amazing how deep that impact goes when you can register folks that you know and see every day. And secondly, final plug, among the hundreds of mayoral forums happening in the next several weeks, there are 2 really important ones. Of course, one is the one being organized on May 20th, next Monday, being organized by, for, and about the Asian Pacific American community in New York City. And the second one is on June 25th. Our cities are homes. You know, NHG is a large network of organizations. Many of us have been helping to organize it. We kicked it off last month with 350 tenants across the city. But the one that we want to see is more Asian representation, because housing, of course, is an issue that deeply affects all of us. So I'd love to see so many of us here at the Housing Forum on June 25th. So
Wait, really quickly, so the last straw poll, how many of you are planning on going on May 20th? Huh. Okay. I thought this was a smart room. All right, everybody try to come on May 20th and June 25th. Actually, a round of applause for Douglas for stepping in and not just organizing the conference, but stepping in to moderate a panel well.
Yeah.
So,
And final round of applause for our panel. Please thank them. Sure.
Good evening, everyone. So we're so happy to be able to kick off our award ceremony now. If everyone could please join us a little bit closer to the front, and we'll get started. So it's been a really great day. I hope everyone's had a chance to meet new people, catch up with old friends, hear about really amazing work that's happening all over the city, and even outside of New York City in the area of community development. To close out this last part of our day today, I really want to take the time to recognize all the amazing staff who not only make AAFE run every day and really help the community, but also our board who are all here today. Wendy Takahisa, Fred Hung, Steve Davey, Bomi Jung, Jacqueline Huey, Suki Terada Ports, and Mitchell Wong. Let's give them a round of applause for Steve Davey. Yeah, Steve Davey. So folks should feel empowered to step up a little bit, get a little bit closer as we begin the award ceremony. So what's really amazing about the Pioneer Spirit Award is that every year AAFE wants to recognize individuals and organizations that are making a difference every single day, making a difference in New York City to improve the quality of life of New Yorkers, but also making a difference in terms of changing perceptions, understandings of the APA community, the immigrant community as a whole, and all the communities that we serve. And we always really want to take the opportunity of the Pioneer Spirit Award to lift up really amazing and visionary work that's happening. And we're so honored to be able to recognize 3 outstanding individuals tonight. So to start us off, I'd like to welcome our Executive Director, Chris Coy, and Anthony Borelli from Edison Properties to present the first award. Let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you. Actually, I want to introduce Tony Borelli because he's actually someone who's amazing. He also actually represents Edison Properties, who's been, like from the beginning, I believe it was 5 or 6 years ago when we first put together this conference. They were the first major sponsors of the event, and I really want to recognize him and then again, Edison Property, but him himself also, because Anthony's been tremendous in terms of working, before Edison actually worked for the President's office and then in the land use area, and I was always very, very impressed with his work. And so let me introduce Tony, and then he's going to introduce our honoree. So, Tony?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chris. As Chris said, I'm representing Edison Properties. Edison is a family-based company based out of Newark, but we own and manage many properties in Manhattan and elsewhere in New York. Our most famous brand names are Edison Parking and Manhattan Mini Storage. So Edison's very proud to be sponsoring this event for the 6th year in a row. So I'm here to present an award to Judy Stern Orlando from Estella Development Corporation, which is based in Coney Island, a community-based nonprofit organization that has developed hundreds of apartments and thousands, or at least 1,000 homes in the Coney Island area. And I didn't know Judy until just now. I'm very happy to meet her. Chris mentioned to me that she was literally the anchor for that community during the Sandy relief efforts, and for which she's being recognized today. So I'm very honored to present Judy with this award.
Well, thank you so much, and I really want to congratulate the other honorees. Superstorm Sandy really took a knockout of Coney Island, as most of you know, and I walked into Estella's office a day or two after the storm, and all our desks were knocked over, and all our computers were knocked over. There was damage from 5 feet of water in our office. And so I knew I had to get the office back together, but also the community. So some friends reached out to me, like Deborah Boatwright, and said, how can we help? And Neighborhood Works came out, and I reached out to AAFE because I knew a lot of our homeowners and a lot of our businesses would feel more comfortable speaking Chinese because that was their first language. And AAFE just came and helped out, and we had a lot of friends come and help us out, and also the community-based organization in the area also worked together. And one thing that Estella did was rent a trailer so that any not-for-profit that were helping people in the community could come together, could sit there. We had AAFE, we still have AAFE, Project Hope, we had Neighbor Works, we have Brooklyn Community Services, we have Met Council, we have all the local community groups in this trailer. And we all learned to share space and all learned to work to better the community and rebuild the community. And I'm happy to say Estella has moved back to its own old office with new sheetrock and new computers and donated desks, but we're on our way. And I will also mention that the community board chair, Eddie Mark from Community Board 13, who is a resident and also worked very hard with us. And as a community, we're rebuilding, and I invite you all to come out this summer. We still have a beautiful beach. The boardwalk is still there. The rides are still there. And come and visit us. And I really want to thank AAFE because you made it so good for the people in the community. And they felt so comfortable. We still have you. You're in our office. And thank you so much. And this is a great honor. Thank you.
Congratulations, Judy. To present the next award, I'd like to invite AAFE's board president, Wendy Takahisa, to join me up here. Wendy?
Thanks. Well, first of all, I'm going to start by introducing myself as a Coney Island baby. I grew up not far from Estella's offices, so I'm very, very appreciative of all the work that you do and all of the work that you continue to do. I have the great honor right now of introducing Deborah Boatwright. One of the fun things about doing these kinds of jobs is you get to read their bios. And so somebody you've known forever, and you sort of think you know them, and you read them and go, wow, that's so impressive. On the other hand, doing it at a cocktail party means I can't say, so look at your programs, and I'm not going to say much because I'm not carrying your programs at this point. So I'll just give you a brief thing about Deborah. Deborah is the head of the Northeast region of NeighborWorks America. NeighborWorks America is a coalition organization of 200 plus organizations, community development organizations throughout the country. It is an incredible organization. It brings together collaboration, technical assistance, funding, support, governance, you name it, NeighborWorks is there, and AAFE is very, very proud to be a NeighborWorks organization. So Deborah ran the Northeast District, and for those of you who have a New Yorker sense of geography, the Northeast District is New York, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. I'm sure that makes as much sense to you as it makes to everybody else. She's now in the Northeast region, which is Maine to Delaware, so it's got DC, still has Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands in it. Prior to going to NeighborWorks, she was at DHCR. I mean, Deborah has just been a mainstay in the community. She's somebody I'm proud to count amongst my dearest friends in the community development movement. She's just an astounding person. Like all great leaders, she has one great flaw. About 2.5 years ago, she did say to me, we must get together for lunch sometime, and I'm still waiting. So Deborah, in the meantime, though, may I please present you this Pioneer Spirit Award to somebody who truly deserves it.
So obviously you'll know what I'm going to do as soon as I get back to my office. But I want to tell you, this is really a great honor. I had remarks prepared for me, but I feel like I'm home here with AAFE. I've known Chris and his staff for so many years when I was at the City Housing Department and then when I moved over to the state. What do you say? I mean, this is the work that I do. You know, I've been in this business for 25 plus years. I've worked in the trenches with you. I've been up in Albany, you know, setting policy for community groups. What you do is a result of my work. And so I look at you and I say, thank you so much for this Pioneer Spirit Award, but it's really, you are the pioneers and you are the folks that I look up to. I am so humbled to be a part of this community, this infrastructure in New York City. As Wendy said, I travel all over, you know, from Maine all the way down to Puerto Rico, and I can't tell you how lucky we are to be in New York City and to have the partners and the collaborations that we do. AAFE is one of our most stellar organizations, and I remember when I was leaving DHCR, is that AAFE came to me and said, I don't even know, Chris, how you knew about it because it really wasn't out yet. But he came and he sat in front of me and he said, you know, Deborah, you're going to an organization, NeighborWorks America, he said, and I'd like to become, you know, one of those NeighborWorks America groups. And I said to him, you know, in my diplomatic way, people that know me, very diplomatic, and I said, okay, Chris, you know, I said, I haven't gotten there yet. I don't know really what the rules are. I don't know what it takes to get there, you know, to be a NeighborWorks group. But as soon as I got there, I was there for about 6 months, and I looked at the criteria, and I looked at the assessment, and I knew that AAFE was a first-rate organization, and I knew that AAFE could pass any test that NeighborWorks America put up there. They are a fabulous group of people. They are dedicated. They are on the ground with every single, you know, community issue that we ask them to be involved in. You should be very proud to be a part of this organization, as I am. And again, I look at you all as Pioneer Spirit awardees. Thank you.
Thank you. So last but not least, we are at our third and final awardee, and really honoring a local hero. I'd like to ask our AAFE board member Suki Tirada Ports, and also City Council member Margaret Chin from District 1, which is the district I always remember because it's easiest to remember. Up to
located as part of our district.
Yes, and we are currently in District 1 to give the final award.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here. I'm so sorry that I couldn't be here at the conference, but I heard it was a wonderful event, and I'll make sure that I get the report, okay? I have such an honor here to really help Suki to present this Pioneer Spirit Award to one of my colleagues, Councilwoman Melissa Marco-Ibarito, who is also the co-chair of the Progressive Caucus in the City Council, which I am also one of the members, the founding members. I know that Melissa always talked about, you know, the growing Asian population in her district. Amazingly, Asian American, Chinese Americans are moving uptown to East Harlem, and especially a lot of them happen to be senior citizens. So I think 2 years ago, we worked with our office, help her get an intern that speaks Chinese, and also work together to do a Lunar New Year event. So Melissa learned how to give Chinese greetings. And she also did it again this year. But I think most memorable, most important is that when you need her, she's there. And this year, when a hate crime incident happened to Asian American seniors up there in East Harlem in the public housing, Melissa was the first one there to really call out to get support for these senior members, and working together with AAFE to help get, I think the perpetrators were arrested, but also to allow the resident there to feel that they have a representative that will help them and support them in their time of need. So congratulations, Melissa. Suki can talk about
you know, you could Google and twit and whatever and find all the things about Melissa, the formal things that are on paper, the graduation from Columbia College, the graduation from Baruch with her master's, all the work she's done. For example, she's done community things. She started a group called the Women of El Barrio, and it's a CBO to promote the development of women to be leaders in the political and social life of their community. And she's done lots of things within the city council realm. For example, she is one of the 8 city council people who has said to her community, it's your community. You have the right to say how you want the money, the $1 million that is capital money, to do something in your community. Why don't you get together and decide who's going to do it? You should have seen the celebration when the announcements were made. People hugged each other, and they were the winners and the losers. And everybody was so excited with the process of being able to decide what was happening. She also has one of the first and the only East Harlem group for age improvement. And what it is she's done things like going to the local stores and said, put a chair in the front so that when people come in and they have to wait for you to look for something or pay for something, they can sit down and rest for a minute. She's put benches in the community, and something that I think is just incredibly wonderful is they have something called the Jefferson Pool, and she said to the parks people, and of course it probably helps that she's chair of the Parks Department, the chair of Parks Committee, she said, look, the seniors go in there and they want to swim, and you know how just excited kids are when they get to the pool. They jump in, they splash each other. Well, she said, give the seniors a time to just relax and have an easy swim. And that's what she got done. So there's lots of things that she's done to just make life very, very special. And as Margaret said, when 6 people got beaten and several very seriously had to be hospitalized, Melissa called around to the community. She called AAFE. Peter G. came up, some other AAFE staff, some community people came together. She had a press conference, and there were people from all over the community who came and said, what's going on? What happened? They were so pleased that Melissa had spoken up for the Asians in the community, the newcomers, and within days, the man was caught as he was trying to escape to Texas or somewhere. I don't know where he was going. But anyway, it was only because she had reached out, and she now has an intern from AAFE, and with AAFE's help, and she has really said, this district is for everybody. And so for that kind of compassion and working with people in the community, AAFE is very proud to give this award.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Suki has become my new best friend. She has just really, we've developed such an unbelievable partnership. I really respect you greatly for all your accomplishments, but she's become a true friend and supporter, and I appreciate it. And with Margaret, it's a real pleasure to serve with Margaret in the City Council as we really look through the Progressive Caucus and through the Black, Latino, Asian Caucus, really actively work to talk about the needs that our communities have and ensure that equitable resources are being distributed and the social policies and public policies are ones that are really being beneficial to all of us in New York City. So it's been a great partnership with you, Margaret, as well. And you know, I'll be very brief. I really am very humbled when I receive recognition in any type, you know, because this is basically a recognition for everyone that works in my office, for all of us that believe in social equity and social justice. And despite the fact, you know, and this is actually something that my staff came and brought to my attention, that we were noticing that we were starting to see a large number of Asian constituents that were coming to our senior centers or were in our community. And we found out that within the 10 years from 2000 to 2010, the Asian population in El Barrio, East Harlem in particular, in my district, had tripled. And although it only is 3%, it was a very, very big jump. So once we identified that, we started to reach out to the organizations that work with the Asian members of our community throughout New York City and said, what can we do to figure out ways that we can really do actively reach out, let them know our office is here? Because I would get calls from Margaret and even Peter Koo saying, they're coming to our office and they live in your district. So we needed to really figure out ways that we could say we are here, we want to we represent you and we welcome you. And so we aggressively, through Margaret's help in finding an intern, did outreach into the community, letting people know. We did conversations in buildings where we knew we had a large number represented, and it was really, really welcoming to see. So now we have the 2 years of the Lunar New Year event, which has been great celebration. Margaret has come. I really appreciate all the support. And then when we had that unfortunate incident where we had so many members of our community that were being severely beaten, to really get out there, raise the visibility, do outreach, hand out flyers, let people know what was going on, and ask them to participate in making sure that if they knew anything, to reach out to the police. So it's just in line with what I believe in. We live in this wonderful, rich fabric that is New York City, so diverse. Everyone needs to be respected. Everyone's contributions need to be honored. And need to be welcomed. And that's my philosophy in general. And I believe, again, as I mentioned, social equity, social justice, and wherever there is an injustice, there is a need. So I want to thank AAFE, too, for all of its work and all the organizations that thrive throughout New York City to make our communities a better place, a safer place, and a more vibrant place. So I humbly accept this. I thank you very much. I look forward to the continued partnership. As you indicated, we now do have an intern. We are providing constituent hours, I think once every week or once every 2 weeks. And so we're really letting the community know that we're there for them, and we appreciate the partnership that AAFE has had with us. Thank you very much.
Sure. We ask all the honorees and those who presented them with awards for one final photo up front together.